My name is Mary, a 35-year-old employee. I was born with a weak constitution, often catching colds and missing school. Perhaps due to this, I didn't have many close friends. Even in middle school, my frailty didn't change. Classmates who didn't like this often approached me, saying, "Hey, you're supposedly sick and missing school, but in reality, you just want to play hooky, right? It must be nice having it so easy. We can't take off because our parents are strict." Honestly, I was envious. Being spoken ill of like that was a usual occurrence. I often came back home feeling hurt and wounded by the heartless words of my classmates. I felt as if there was an invisible wall between me and my classmates, making my middle school days particularly difficult. As an adult, I couldn't easily miss work for a minor fever, so I always put work first, even if it meant pushing myself. Especially as a new employee, my training supervisor was extremely stern. He constantly said things like, "Illness comes from the mind, show some spirit." So keeping up with it was quite a struggle. As my days were consumed by work, I noticed my peers getting married and becoming happy. It made me realize that I was reaching that age too. However, I never felt a rush to get married. I believed I would never find a kind person who would want to marry someone with my health issues. But life is unpredictable, and unexpectedly, a man who invited me out for a meal appeared out of the blue. This person is my husband, Thomas. "Hey, looks like you're finishing up for the day, right? If it's all right with you, would you like to grab dinner together?" Thomas was an elite, a graduate of a prestigious university, and was considered a future head of the department. He was not only competent at work but also cooperative and trusted by everyone around him. He had a personality completely opposite to my introverted one. I was surprised when he suddenly invited me to dinner. At first, I didn't even realize he was talking to me and thought he must have mistaken me for someone else. However, it seemed he was indeed inviting me, which even left me blurting out, "Ha!" Thomas was quite popular with the female employees because of his personality and good looks. It was a mystery to me why he was still single. Yes, I'm almost done with my work, so that would be fine. In the end, I couldn't refuse his invitation, so I went along for dinner. But this meal became the catalyst for the two of us to grow close quickly. He was very friendly, and the conversation flowed naturally. It was the first time in a long time I had been able to laugh and talk with someone other than family. Although I had to head home because of work the next day, I found myself wishing I could spend more time with him. We started spending more time together after that meal, and 3 months later, we began dating. Considering our ages, we decided to marry. A year after we started dating, we found a small apartment near the train station and moved in together. I never imagined I'd get married and truly believed I was about to start a happy life. I never expected this marriage to be the beginning of a nightmare. Shortly after getting married, he gradually began to reveal his true nature. After our marriage, I switched jobs and started working at a different company. It was a company with many female employees. During the interview, when I mentioned my health issues, they reassured me that with so many women working there, I shouldn't worry. Today, I was able to take a day off due to their understanding. "Hey, why are you sleeping? The head of the household is back. Shouldn't you welcome me home? You're so dumb." As soon as I got home, he came into the room with a sulky face, seemingly displeased that I hadn't greeted him. "I'm sorry. I was feeling unwell today and took the day off from work. I'm about to make dinner. Why don't you go take a bath first?" Upon hearing these words, Thomas, who was already in a bad mood, said, "Ha! You're just starting to make dinner now? When a husband comes home, it's obvious that dinner should be ready. Are you lying about being sick just because you want to skip household chores? You're such an incorrigible woman." His words reminded me of what my classmates used to say to me back in my school days. They would often say I was skipping class under the guise of being sick. Their words would always hurt my heart, but even when I was feeling sick, Thomas never helped with the chores. Instead, he treated me like a housemaid. Then one day, a certain incident happened. I felt particularly bad that day, with a fever exceeding 104 degrees and dizzy to the point where I couldn't even stand up. Ideally, Thomas should have taken me to the hospital, but instead, he grabbed his carry-on bag and walked straight out the front door without a glance at me. "Wait a minute, you're leaving me in this condition?" Shocked by his indifference, I couldn't help but shout, "It can't be helped. It was planned from before. Take care of the rest." With that, he really left the house. About 30 minutes after he left, my condition worsened. I called an ambulance myself and was taken to the hospital. My parents and my brother came rushing to the hospital as soon as they heard the news. While receiving an IV, I explained everything that had happened so far. As I spoke, both my parents' and brother's faces turned red. Leaving his sick wife behind to go on a trip, this behavior was unacceptable not only to my parents but also to me. That's why I decided to carry out a certain plan with my parents and brother. I did text him that I was hospitalized, and soon after, I got a message from Thomas. I'm about to head home, so I called the house, but no answer. Are you still in the hospital? Come home and cook my dinner. Seeing this message, my brother decided to call Thomas. Surprised by the sudden call from my brother from my phone, Thomas assumed it was me and started talking arrogantly. However, when he realized it was my brother, he immediately changed his tone and started apologizing. But it was too late. With a low, angry voice, my brother said to him, "Sorry to inform you, but Mary won't be coming back to that house. She passed away." What? Even Thomas couldn't hide his surprise at the shocking words that suddenly came out of my brother's mouth. However, he soon regained his composure and said with a nonchalant tone, "I see. Understood. Once things settle down, I'll take care of the necessary procedures. Thank you for everything till now," and with that, he hung up the phone. Wouldn't most people, upon hearing their wife had passed away while traveling, rush home in a panic? Yet he, far from showing concern, hasn't even asked about the funeral schedule. In other words, he couldn't care less about me. After that, I felt something snap within me. From then on, I decided to carry out a plan that my brother had devised while he was at work. I returned home. I deliberately cleaned up the messy room until it sparkled, folded the laundry that had been hung up, and put away the dishes, taking great care not to drop a single speck of dust. During that time, I checked things like the drains and toothbrushes. After doing this a few times, my brother received a call from him. "Hey, it's rare for you to call. What's up?" Although he spoke calmly, my brother's eyes were smiling. He probably knew he would get a call. Unaware of this, he said over the phone, Can I ask you something? Did you go into my room while I was out?" "Into your room? No, I didn't go in. Why would you ask that?" Perhaps even he, as insensitive as he is, found it eerie that the room was constantly sparkling clean, so he thought my brother was entering the room and called to confirm. The thing is, the room that was messy until this morning is incredibly clean. When I returned home, the trash on the floor was thrown away, the laundry is folded. Something is weird. Did you come to pick up Mary's stuff? Speaking with a tremor in his voice, my brother replied, "Oh, come on, there's no way I'd do that. I never got a spare key to your room for my sister when she was alive, and our mom has been too busy with work lately to visit you there, Thomas. You must be tired to think this way." Although it was my brother who planned it, I was the one carrying it out. Even for my brother, it was impossible to enter the room without permission. Therefore, in legal terms, it's still me, his wife, who was doing this. I, who was listening to the conversation next door, had a hard time not bursting out laughing. If your room was ransacked, I could understand. But it's clean. Is there a problem with that? No, that's not it. It seemed he had something he didn't want to say. My husband fell silent. A few days later, there was another call from him to my brother's cell phone. Apparently, strange things continued to happen after that, so he consulted with the police. However, the police officer did not take his story seriously. Because if things were missing, they could understand. But when he explained that the rooms were sparkling clean, the laundry was folded, they laughed and said, "Are you living alone? Maybe your mom came from your family home and cleaned up your room? Or did you forget that you cleaned up while you were drunk? Anyway, since nothing is missing, you should be grateful." That's unfortunate, but as the police officer said, nothing is missing. That's a good thing, right? Maybe Mary's spirit is lingering in your room, cleaning it up while you're away. Upon saying this, he seemed to take it seriously and hung up with a trembling voice. Eventually, considering the potential nuisance to others, I decided to reveal myself to my husband. One day, timing it perfectly with my husband Thomas's return, I entered the room to find him asleep on the sofa, his face flushed red. He might have come back from a drinking party, or maybe the alcohol helped him sleep better. The table and floor were strewn with cans of beer. It seemed like he had fallen asleep in his drunken stupor. Seeing him fast asleep and snoring, I decided to carry out a special surprise. I had in mind, what's going on? Thomas suddenly jumped as the light, which he thought had been turned off, suddenly switched on. Seeing me, whom he believed had passed away based on the information from my brother, he let out a gasp. Ariel, a ghost, an adult man, saw me and immediately yelled that I was a ghost, tears welling up in his eyes as he stared at me. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't attend the funeral. I promised to pray for you, so please rest in peace. He mumbled these words while putting his hands together, trembling. Look carefully. I've got legs, right? I'm not a ghost, I'm very much alive. Confirming the existence of my legs, he turned red with anger, this time glaring at me with a terrifying expression. What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you think this is acceptable? Plus, you've even involved my parents. Unforgivable. I'll take legal action against you for this. Yes, against the outburst, I was about to execute the real surprise. Suddenly, my mother, who had been waiting outside the entrance, went to call someone. The moment he saw the person, Thomas, who had been red with anger just a moment ago, turned pale and began to sweat profusely. What's wrong? You're pale and sweating. Are you feeling unwell? Maybe you should go to the hospital. It was understandable why his complexion was poor, because the person standing in front of him was someone he had recently traveled with. It was the woman with whom he had had an affair. In reality, my brother, suspecting Thomas's infidelity, had been talking to a friend who worked in the same company since I left the job. Thomas had been getting along well with a woman named Natalie who worked at the reception of the same company. It seemed as if they were just friendly colleagues. Multiple employees had witnessed the two of them getting cozy in the break room, and rumors circulated in the company that the two might be dating. Many employees knew that he was married to me, so they immediately realized that their relationship was something more than just friendship. His good friends were torn between reporting this to me and the boss. They were hesitant because they were worried about me, who had always been weak, and how I might fall sick from the shock. Hearing this, the woman bowed her head and bit her lip, unbearably embarrassed. Thomas, feeling embarrassed, called his mother to explain the situation. In response, his furious mother shouted at us with a ferocious tone. What is this? Being my son like this, I've always disliked you. Despite not graduating from a prestigious university, you are so arrogant. On top of that, you all tricked my son and hurt him, which is unforgivable. I'll make sure you divorce. There will be no alimony. Whether it was because she had been shouting or not, she was taking heavy breaths, her shoulders heaving up and down. Of course, if she didn't know the situation, it was only natural for her to be upset, thinking we were bullying Thomas one-sidedly. However, my father spoke calmly, explaining the whole situation to my fuming stepmother. The first time she heard this, she had a look on her face that said she could hardly believe it. When he explained that her son had abandoned his wife, who was suffering from poor health, to go out with his mistress who was in the room, it seemed she finally noticed the presence of this mistress. Her previous bluster was gone, and she was simply shaken. The woman, feeling completely uncomfortable, bowed her head in apology to us. I am so sorry. I will fully pay you damages. Please forgive me. Unlike her flustered boyfriend and dazed mother-in-law, the woman bowed deeply and apologized. I had her write a promissory note on the spot. When I told her I would consult a lawyer at a later date, she responded in a frail voice, "Understood." I couldn't possibly forgive someone who had done this to me. I showed him the filled-out divorce papers and said, I can't possibly forgive you for this. I'm going to consult a lawyer about everything that's happened. After that, I divorced him. Because he didn't come to my aid when I was ill, I ended up receiving a significant amount of money. With that money, I rented a small apartment and have been commuting to work from there. The office is still full of talks about the two of them, but I don't know if it's because he's thick-skinned or what, but he continues to work as if nothing has happened. Hearing about that doesn't make me feel anything. If anything, I think, so that's what kind of man he was. I decided to try and forget about this as soon as possible and threw myself into my work even more than before. Even with difficult tasks, I worked hard to understand them while asking my boss, and it seems that my efforts were recognized as I was chosen for a 1-year overseas assignment. I am already fluent in English, so I won't have any trouble living abroad. Just as I was getting excited about my overseas assignment, I suddenly started getting repeated calls from an unknown number. Since it was an unknown number, I initially thought it was a wrong number, but since it kept calling over and over again, I thought it might be someone I know, and I answered the call. Hello? Who is this? When I cautiously asked, it turned out to be Thomas. It's been a while, Mary. Have you been well? I just wanted to hear your voice and ended up calling. Unbelievable. He called me casually after what happened. I wonder what he could think of me. The more I heard his voice, the angrier I became. What do you want now? I have nothing to discuss with you. After this call, never contact me again. Then he started talking with a desperate voice. Wait, just listen to me for a second. Actually, I married Natalie, but she doesn't do any housework at all. Since we got married, she doesn't clean at all. And all we eat are pre-made meals. On top of that, I've started to have to take care of my mother. Honestly, I'm in trouble. Although she looked beautiful and neat, in reality, she didn't do any housework. All the meals were grab-and-go food or ready-made meals, and she didn't clean, so the floor was covered in dust. On top of everything, he had to begin to take care of his mother, and in desperation, he turned to me for help. I couldn't help but let out a heavy sigh over the phone, and I felt more certain than ever that breaking up had been the right choice. I'm sorry, but I'm scheduled for an overseas assignment, and there's nothing I can do. Besides, she's the woman you chose. You can't blame anyone else. Take care of your own wife. Upon learning I couldn't assist due to my overseas posting, he pleaded, help me. Take me with you to your new overseas position. I can't stand this filthy woman anymore. Life was better with you. Give me another chance. But even if he asks for another chance, he wanted this outcome. No matter how much he struggles, he can't return to the previous state. He was still talking over the phone, but I left him hanging, said I had work, and ended the call. Then I blocked his number. He didn't like that. It seems that very day he showed up at my parents' house, demanding a remarriage and help, spouting nonsense. My father called the police, and he was taken to the station. The company found out about this, and he got fired. He also got divorced, and to pay alimony, he is helping out with the family business while taking care of his mother. Apparently, the family business is physically demanding and quite harsh, and he tries to run away from home many times. But each time he is brought back by relatives, and he seems to be having a hard time every day.
Growing up, I always felt like the backdrop in a two-person play, starring my sister, Lily, as the cherished lead. Our parents never tried to hide their preference for her. It was like living in a house where I was the guest, and Lily was the princess. From as early as I can remember, Lily got everything, the best dresses, the new toys, and most importantly, their attention. I got hand-me-downs, stuff from bargain bins, and the occasional nod that yes, I existed too. One evening, I was about 10, I remember sitting at the dinner table. Dad was going on about Lily's school project. Look at this castle Lily made. Isn't it something? Dad said, his eyes lighting up like Christmas trees as he held up a glitter-covered cardboard castle. Mom nodded, beaming at Lily. It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so talented. I had made a volcano that actually erupted, but it was sitting on the other end of the table, unnoticed. Mine erupts, I muttered, but no one paid attention. Lily, with her bright green eyes sparkling, leaned over and whispered loud enough for only me to hear. It's just baking soda and vinegar. Not a big deal. I clenched my fists under the table, feeling my face heat up. But I stayed quiet. Arguing with Lily only made things worse, because somehow, I always ended up being the bad guy. Grandma was the only one who saw through it all. She lived with us, thank God, and she was my one ally. One day, after a particularly nasty episode where Lily had blamed me for breaking a vase I hadn't even touched, Grandma pulled me aside. You know, Anna, your parents might not see everything, but I do. You're just as special, never doubt that, she said, her voice firm and reassuring. I wish they could see that too, I replied, looking down at my scuffed shoes. Grandma hugged me tightly. I've told your dad time and again, children should be loved equally. But it never changed. As we grew up, Lily turned into a master of manipulation. She had our parents wrapped around her finger, and anything she did wrong somehow got pinned on me. One day, I overheard her talking on the phone with a friend. Anna is such a loser. She thinks Mom and Dad actually care about her. It's hilarious. I stormed into her room, furious. Why do you have to be like this, Lily? What have I ever done to you? She just smirked, her red hair like a halo of fire around her wicked grin. Oh, Anna, don't be such a drama queen. Everyone knows I'm the good one here. I wanted to yell, to scream that she wasn't, that she was lying and cruel. But I knew better. It would just end in tears, mine. Instead, I walked away, my heart pounding, knowing I had to get out of this house as soon as I could. When high school ended, and I got into college, I was ready to leave and never look back. But my parents refused to pay for my tuition. They said it was because I wasn't serious enough about my future. Luckily, Grandma stepped in. She paid my fees, telling me to use this chance to build a life for myself, away from the shadow of my sister. College was like stepping into another world, one where no one knew about Lily or how I was always the second choice in my family. It felt like I could finally breathe, like I was shedding an old skin that never really fit me in the first place. The first person I met on campus was Carla, my roommate. She was from another state and didn't know a thing about me, which was refreshing. Carla had this straightforward way of talking that I wasn't used to back home. "Hey, I'm Carla. You're Anna, right? Let's make this room cool, okay?" she said as soon as I walked into our tiny dorm room, her words direct and devoid of any pretense. "Sure, sounds good to me," I replied, grateful for her easy demeanor. In those first few weeks, Carla showed me around, introducing me to her friends and pulling me into her social circle. I was hesitant at first, unsure how to act when no one expected me to fail or fade into the background. Hanging out with Carla and her friends, I realized they spoke their minds, no filters, no walking on eggshells. It was all straightforward and, honestly, kind of liberating. "Anna, you gotta loosen up. We're all here to have a good time, not judge each other," Carla said one night as we sat in the common room, surrounded by laughter and the smell of microwave popcorn. "I know, I'm just not used to this," I admitted, feeling a bit out of place, but welcome at the same time. "Well, get used to it. You're with us now," she said with a wink. As the semester went on, I started joining study groups, attending class regularly, and really throwing myself into my marketing courses. My professors noticed. "Miss Grant, your project was impressive. You have a knack for this," Professor Jacobs commented one day after class, handing back a paper I'd written with a high grade on it. "Thank you, Professor. I really enjoyed working on it," I said, feeling a pride I hadn't known before. At the end of my first year, I got a summer internship at a local marketing firm. I was over the moon. I called Grandma to tell her the news. "That's wonderful, Anna. I knew you could do it." Grandma's voice crackled over the phone, filled with genuine pride. "Thanks, Grandma. I couldn't have done it without your help," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "And you'll do even more. Just watch," she said, her confidence in me unshakable. By the time senior year rolled around, I was a different person. I had confidence, real friends, and a career path that excited me. College gave me the freedom to be who I wanted to be, away from the shadow of my family's expectations and Lily's manipulative antics. After graduation, I landed a job at a well-known cosmetology company in the city. But it wasn't just my career that was about to change, my personal life was on the brink of something entirely new. It all started at a city exhibition where different companies showcased their products. I was in charge of our company's booth, explaining the benefits of our latest skincare line to anyone who showed interest. "Looks like you really know your stuff," a voice said from behind me. I turned around to see a tall guy with an easy smile watching me. "Thanks. I try," I responded, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "I'm Michael," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Anna," I replied, shaking his hand. There was an immediate, undeniable spark. We chatted casually at first about the products and the exhibition. But then, the conversation shifted. Michael was funny, throwing jokes left and right, making me laugh more than I had in a long while. And so, half-jokingly, we set up a date for the following weekend. Dinner turned into seeing each other almost every weekend after that. Michael was different. He listened when I talked, really listened. He cared about what I thought and felt, which was a new and wonderful experience for me. The months flew by, filled with little moments and big feelings. Before I knew it, a year had passed, and we were seriously discussing our future together. One night, over a quiet dinner at our favorite little Italian place, Michael looked more serious than usual. He took a deep breath. "Anna, how would you feel about making this official? Like, really official?" I knew what he meant, but I needed to hear him say it. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" I prompted him. Michael nodded, taking my hands in his. "Marry me, Anna. Let's start our own story." Tears sprang to my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound happiness that flooded through me. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." Getting engaged to Michael was like a dream. I was over the moon, floating through my days with a goofy grin plastered on my face. But when it came to actually planning the wedding, reality hit hard and fast, especially when my family got involved. I remember calling my parents to tell them the news. Their response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear," Mom said, her voice strained. "But are you sure about this? You know how these things can be rushed." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "Yes, Mom, I'm sure. Michael is great, and we're really happy together." "Well, if you say so," she sighed, and then quickly changed the subject. The trouble really started when I went home to discuss the wedding plans. The air was thick with tension the minute I stepped into the house. Dad was the first to bring up the elephant in the room. "You know, Lily should really help with the wedding. She has such good taste," Dad suggested, casting a meaningful glance at Mom. Lily, who'd been surprisingly quiet, suddenly lit up. "Oh, absolutely. I'd love to help plan your wedding, Anna." I was suspicious. Lily and helping didn't usually go in the same sentence unless it benefited her directly. But before I could decline, Mom chimed in. "It would be such a nice way to bond before the big day. And think about it, Anna, with your work schedule, do you really have the time to manage everything?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. I was too busy, and maybe, just maybe, Lily had changed. How wrong I was. Weeks went by, and every time I called Lily to check on the progress, she reassured me with her sweetest voice. "Everything's under control, sis. I booked the venue, and wait till you see the decorations I planned." 2 weeks before the wedding, I took a day off to see everything for myself. The venue was booked, all right, but that was about it. No caterer, no decorator, no nothing. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I called Lily, my voice shaking with anger. "What the hell, Lily? You said everything was taken care of." "Oh, calm down, Anna. You're always so dramatic. It's all going to be fine." She brushed me off. "Fine? There's nothing done. Were you planning to ruin my wedding?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice dripping with feigned innocence, she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Everything will be ready, trust me." I hung up, fuming. No way I was going to let her mess this up. I called my friend Janet, who had an impressive experience with event planning. "Janet, I'm in a bind. Can you help me salvage my wedding?" "Of course, Anna. Don't worry, we'll make sure your day is perfect. What's done is done. Let's fix this," Janet responded, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. With Janet's help, we started from scratch. It was a mad dash of booking, tasting, and organizing, but slowly things started coming together. The day before the wedding, I confronted Lily again. This time in person. She just shrugged. "Look, I did what I could. If that's not enough for you, then maybe you're expecting too much," Lily said, her voice cool and detached. I expected my sister to have my back. Clearly, I was wrong. I replied, my voice steady, despite the anger boiling inside. Despite all the setbacks, the wedding day arrived, and it was everything I had hoped for and more. The venue looked beautiful, the food was delicious, and the music set the perfect mood. As I danced with Michael, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world, I almost forgot about the chaos Lily had tried to cause. Almost. But as the evening wore on, the inevitable couldn't be avoided. It was time for the speeches, and my heart sank as Lily stepped up to the microphone, her smile a little too sweet. "Hello, everyone." Lily's voice was bright, carrying over the crowd. "I just want to say how happy I am for Anna and Michael. Being the maid of honor and the wedding planner was such an honor." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. The lies were too much. She was taking credit for everything Janet and I had scrambled to fix. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but Michael squeezed my hand, giving me a look that said, "Let it go." But then Mom took the microphone from Lily, her eyes glistening with pride, for Lily, not for me. "And we need to thank Lily for saving the day. We are so proud of how you stepped up. Anna, you should be grateful to have such a wonderful sister." That was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Actually," I started, my voice loud enough to draw every eye in the room to me. I stood, my chair scraping back sharply. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The room went silent, all chatter stopping as everyone waited for what I would say next. "Lily didn't plan this," I said, my voice steady, despite the shaking in my legs. 2 weeks before today, I found out nothing was prepared. No flowers, no caterer, not even a cake. If it wasn't for my friend Janet, who is here tonight, this day would have been a disaster. Lily stood up, her chair clattering behind her. "That's not true. I did so much for this wedding. Anna, why are you always trying to make me look bad? Why? You wanted this day to fail," I said, turning to face him, then the crowd. "I have the emails from the vendors, messages saying they hadn't heard from anyone until I contacted them." Lily's expression faltered, then burst into tears, running from the room. The dramatic exit, another classic move. The rest of the evening was a blur. Some guests whispered and shot me sympathetic looks, while others seemed to buy into Lily's tearful act. It hurt, but at least now, some people knew the truth. As the party wound down, Michael held me close, whispering, "We're married now. That's all that matters." He was right. Despite the drama, we were together, and that was the most important thing. But as we left the venue, I couldn't help but feel the sting of my family's doubts, and Lily's treachery lingering in the air. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. My sister Lily disappeared, leaving behind nothing but her car, her purse, and a damning note that pointed the finger straight at me. The note was a masterstroke in her ongoing drama, claiming my supposed cruelty drove her to think about ending her life. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My parents, already cool towards me thanks to Lily's theatrics at the wedding, now turned ice cold. The phone call from my mom about Lily's disappearance is etched into my mind, her voice cold and accusing. "Anna, your sister is gone. She left a note, and she blames you. She said you've been cruel, that you pushed her to this," Mom said, each word like a dagger. "That's ridiculous. I haven't done anything to her. You know how she is, how she twists things," I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and despair. "Enough, Anna. Your sister is missing, possibly worse, and all you can think about is defending yourself," she snapped before hanging up. The accusations didn't stop there. Relatives, friends, even neighbors seemed to have read the script Lily left behind, all casting me as the villain in her twisted story. But the worst blow came from Grandma, the one person I thought I could always count on. When I went to see her, hoping for some support, she met me with a frosty gaze, her disappointment palpable. "Anna, I can't believe you. Your sister felt so tormented she had to run away. And all you can say is that it's a lie?" Grandma's voice was stern, her usual warm tone gone. "Grandma, please, you know me. I would never hurt Lily," I pleaded, feeling the tears start to well up. Grandma shook her head, her expression hardening. "I thought I knew you. But Lily's note. Anna, she was clearly in a lot of pain. And no truth you wanted to prove is worth her life." "But it's not the truth," I protested, my voice rising in desperation. "I think it's best if you leave. I need to think about all this, about where we all went wrong," she said, turning away from me, signaling the conversation was over. Walking away from Grandma's house that day felt like leaving my last safe haven. Betrayed and isolated, the weight of the entire situation bore down on me, crushing. As the days turned into weeks, with no word from Lily, the strain started to show in every aspect of my life. Michael tried to be supportive, but the constant stress was a wedge between us. "Anna, maybe it's time to just let it go. Maybe stop trying to defend yourself and just move on," Michael suggested one evening, his voice weary. "How can I move on? My own family thinks I'm a monster. How do we just live with that?" I snapped, frustration boiling over. I felt utterly alone, surrounded by people who either believed the worst about me or didn't know how to help. And with Lily gone, the narrative she crafted seemed to solidify into an undeniable truth in the eyes of everyone around me. With each passing day adding weight to the loneliness I felt. Michael, the one person I believed would always be by my side, had grown distant. His frequent business trips to another city only widened the chasm between us. It wasn't just emotional distance, something tangible had shifted, and the receipt I found one afternoon was the grim proof. Stuffed carelessly between the pages of a magazine on our coffee table was a receipt for women's clothing, expensive clothing, the kind you buy when you want to impress someone. The kind you don't buy for your wife and then forget to mention. At first, denial took over. There must be some explanation, a surprise maybe? But the cold, hard doubt crept in, gnawing at me. After everything with Lily and the family, this felt like another bitter betrayal. I needed answers. I hired a private detective. It felt so cliché, like something out of a bad movie, but what other options did I have? I gave him all the details, Michael's travel schedule, the receipt, everything. He called a couple of weeks later. "I have the results of the investigation," he said, his voice neutral. "I'll drop off the full report and the photos tomorrow. It's best if you see everything for yourself." The next day, armed with the report and a sealed envelope of photos, I felt like I was on the verge of a breakdown. But there was one thing I needed to do before confronting Michael. I needed to talk to Grandma. Grandma looked frail, her illness having taken a visible toll on her. But when she saw me, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, confusion, maybe a hint of relief. "Anna, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice weaker than I remembered. "I needed to see you," I said, stepping inside, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hand. We sat in her living room, the air thick with unsaid words. I handed her the envelope, watching her hands tremble slightly as she opened it and pulled out the photos. I watched her face as she looked at each photo, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to sadness. Then she looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "Oh, Anna. I had no idea," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. "Grandma, I know things have been awful between us. I know you felt I pushed Lily away, but these show a different story," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She reached out, her hand gripping mine tightly. "I was wrong, Anna. I'm so sorry. Your sister, she deceived me too, not just you." Grandma passed away quietly 2 weeks after our last conversation, and we gathered at her house for her will reading. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and faint floral perfume, a smell that always reminded me of Grandma. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, steeling myself for what was to come. Then the door swung open dramatically, and there she was, Lily, her red hair just as fiery as I remembered, her smirk as smug as ever. The room erupted. My parents burst into tears, rushing to embrace her, cries of joy mingling with sighs of relief. Everyone was shocked, everyone except me. Lily didn't waste a moment, striding over to Michael with that confident swagger, planting a kiss on his lips like she owned him. The gasps that followed were audible, the shock palpable. She turned to face me, that smirk still playing on her lips. "I planned it all, Anna," she said, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "I made sure Grandma would turn against you, thinking she'd leave everything to me. Pretty clever, huh?" The room froze, all eyes on us. Michael moved to sit next to Lily, their hands finding each other like pieces of a sinister puzzle falling into place. I felt the eyes on me, waiting for a breakdown, a scream, tears, anything. But I was done with the theatrics. I met Lily's gaze with a calm I barely felt. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice even. Her smile faltered, not expecting my composure. The notary cleared his throat, ready to read Grandma's will. You could hear a pin drop as he unfolded the papers, his voice solemn. "I, Eleanor Thompson, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath all my property and assets to..." There was a pause, a cruel stretch of silence, before he continued. "Anna Grant." Lily's face, Michael's face, it was a picture. The shock, the disbelief, the betrayal. It was all there, raw and unfiltered. Michael looked at me, then at Lily, his expression one of a man defeated. "I knew about everything," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "I knew you were hiding in the city Michael frequently visited for his business trips. I knew about the affair." I pulled out the photos and evidence the detective had gathered and tossed them on the table. The room erupted into chaos, voices raised in shock, anger, disbelief. My parents, still clinging to their golden child, looked at me with eyes full of questions and accusations. Lily and Michael started blubbering, apologies and excuses spilling out. "Anna, please, we didn't mean..." "Save it," I cut them off, my heart hardening against their fake pleas. "I'm filing for divorce, and I want compensation for the betrayal." My statement was met with stunned silence, then more whispers. Lily tried to reach out, tears streaming down her face, but I was done. "You made your choice," I told her coldly. After the meeting, as the room cleared, I stayed back, letting the reality of everything wash over me. The money, the property, it meant nothing compared to the betrayal. I signed the necessary papers, my signature steady, my resolve clear. Life moved on. I settled the divorce, received the compensation, and started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Hi, I'm Tessa. I've always been the kind to keep my head down and work hard. It's paid off. I landed a job at a major trading company right out of college and clawed my way up from there. Life was straightforward: work, sleep, and the occasional night out with friends to blow off steam. That routine changed the night I met Lucas. It was at one of those rare outings with friends, a loud party downtown where the music pounds in your chest and you have to shout to be heard. Lucas was different, more reserved, hanging back from the crowd, nursing a beer. He had that look, you know? Like he had a story to tell, but preferred to keep it to himself. We got to talking, or rather, shouting over the noise. Turns out, we both shared a distaste for these kinds of loud parties, which was kind of funny, considering where we were. Lucas was easy to talk to. He had this straightforward way about him that I appreciated right off the bat. Not really my scene, to be honest. He yelled over the music, a small smile playing on his lips. "Then why are you here?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Trying to keep my cousin happy. She dragged me out tonight," he admitted, rolling his eyes slightly. "Sounds like a good brother," I replied, nodding in approval. We ditched the party early, opting for a quieter bar down the street where we could actually hear each other. That night we talked about everything, from our jobs to our taste in movies. Lucas mentioned his previous marriage almost in passing. It didn't work out. She wasn't faithful, he said simply, his voice flat. But that's the past. His honesty caught me off guard, but it also made me respect him more. We started seeing each other regularly after that night. Things moved fast, and it wasn't long before we were talking about a future together. After Lucas and I decided to make things official, he was eager to introduce me to his mother, Susan. We planned a Sunday brunch at her place, and I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I wanted to make a good impression. As we pulled up to her tidy, two-story house, Lucas turned to me with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Just be yourself, he said, squeezing my hand. The moment we stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of bacon and eggs. The house was spotless, every item in its rightful place, which told me she probably spent the better part of the morning cleaning and preparing for this. Lucas, my boy. Susan's voice rang out from the kitchen, followed by her appearance in the doorway. She wiped her hands on her apron as she approached us. Her gaze landed on me, and it felt like she was trying to x-ray my soul. And you must be Tessa. Heard a lot about you. Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Thompson, I said, extending my hand. She shook it, her grip surprisingly firm. Call me Susan. Mrs. Thompson was my mother-in-law, and I couldn't stand her. Her blunt statement threw me off, but I laughed it off. All right, Susan it is. We sat down at the dining table, which was meticulously set with fine china and crystal glasses, an indication of how important this meeting was to her. Susan served us, then took the seat across from me, her eyes never straying far. So, Tessa, she started, cutting straight to the chase. Lucas tells me you're quite the career woman. Trading, is it? Sounds like a man's world. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a jab. Yes, it's trading, and it's for anyone who's good at it, I replied, keeping my tone light. Lucas chimed in, perhaps sensing the tension. Tessa's one of the top traders at her firm. She's really good at what she does. That so? Susan's voice carried a note of skepticism. I hope you know, Lucas needs someone who's present, not stuck at the office all hours. I felt my cheeks warm up, but I kept my cool. I manage my time well. Lucas and I have plenty of quality time together. Susan hummed, poking at her food. We'll see. I remember Lucas's ex was always busy too, until she was busy with someone else. Lucas's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, that's enough. Oh, relax. I'm just making conversation, Susan said, waving a dismissive hand. She then turned her attention back to me. Tell me, Tessa, do you cook? Or should my son expect takeout every night? I love to cook, I said, forcing a smile. Lucas can vouch for my lasagna. Lucas nodded vigorously. It's true. She makes a mean lasagna. Well, isn't that something? Susan's tone softened a fraction. Maybe you'll have to make it for me one of these days. The rest of the meal passed with small talk about the weather and Susan's garden, which she seemed more passionate about. Every now and then, she'd throw in a pointed question or comment, testing my responses. It was like a verbal sparring match, and I was determined not to let my guard down. As we were leaving, Susan pulled me aside. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but her words cut through the air. Listen, Tessa. My son's happiness is everything to me. I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. Remember that. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I have no intention of hurting Lucas. You have nothing to worry about. Susan studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll see, won't we? After the brunch with Susan, I thought maybe things would settle down, but I was way off. Lucas's work required him to travel a lot, which meant I was home alone often. Susan saw this as her chance to really crank up her watch over me. It started with unexpected visits. The first time it happened, I was working from my home office when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to find Susan standing there, her face set in a stern expression that didn't promise anything good. Tessa, just in the neighborhood, she said, brushing past me into the house as if it was her own. Thought I'd drop by. I masked my annoyance with a tight smile. Nice to see you, Susan. What brings you here? Oh, just making sure everything's alright here while my son's away, she said, already wandering into the living room, eyeing everything critically. Her visits became more frequent, and each time, Susan had something to say about how I kept the house. It was like living under a microscope. One day, she walked into the kitchen while I was prepping dinner and started rifling through my pantry. Just seeing what you feed my son when he's home. You know processed foods are no good, right? she commented, holding up a box of pasta like it was evidence in a trial. But it didn't stop at home visits. I started noticing Susan around places I frequented, the grocery store, the gym, even the cafe near my work. It was getting creepy. One afternoon, I confronted her. She was, coincidentally, at the same grocery store as me, pushing her cart down the aisle I was in. "Susan, this is the third time this week I've run into you like this. What's going on?" She played innocent, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "What, can't a woman do her shopping? Not at the exact same places and exact same times as her daughter-in-law, consistently. What are you trying to do, Susan?" Her smile faded, and she leaned closer, her voice low and harsh. "I'm keeping my eyes open, Tessa. You can play the perfect wife all you want, but I know about your desire to cheat on my son." Every encounter left me more frustrated and angry. It wasn't just the invasion of my privacy, it was the constant tension, the expectation of having to defend myself against imaginary accusations. Over time, Susan's eyesight had gotten worse, something about her age and her health stacking the odds against her. The doctor had given her glasses, but she hated them. Said they made her feel old and irritated her nose. She'd put them on and take them off, fussing and fuming, and more often than not, she'd just leave them somewhere and forget. Because of that, she saw very poorly, which only added fuel to her naturally suspicious nature. With Lucas away on another one of his frequent business trips, I had grown accustomed to handling things on my own, including dealing with Susan's relentless scrutiny. One evening, feeling a bit cooped up and in need of a change of scenery, I made plans to meet my brother, Jake, for dinner. It was a casual meet-up, nothing fancy, just a chance to catch up with family and unwind. I chose a little outdoor restaurant with a nice terrace that wasn't too far from where I worked. Jake arrived first, and I spotted him at a table, waving me over with a big grin. "Hey, sis," he called out as I approached. His face was all bright and cheerful, the typical big brother ready to tease or share a joke. "Hey, Jake. It's been too long," I said, giving him a quick hug before sitting down across from him. We ordered some food and drinks, and the conversation flowed easily, as it always did with Jake. We talked about work, family, and some of the latest movies we'd both seen. It was nice, relaxing, and exactly what I needed. As the evening wore on, we wrapped things up. Outside the restaurant, we stood up to say goodbye. I gave Jake a friendly hug, just a normal sister-brother moment. When I got home later that night, the house was dark and quiet. But as I turned on the light in the living room, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was Susan, sitting on my couch, a smug look plastered across her face, and holding what looked like a digital camera. "What the hell, Susan? What are you doing in my house at this hour?" My voice was a mix of anger and shock. She rose from the couch, holding up the camera. "Gotcha," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous triumph. "Got what, exactly?" I snapped, my patience thinning rapidly. "This." She thrust the camera in my face, showing a photo of Jake and me hugging. "Caught you red-handed with your lover." I rolled my eyes, tossing my keys on the table. "I was with my brother, Jake. We had dinner. That's it." Susan snorted, a harsh, mocking sound that made my hands clench into fists at my sides. "Sure, your brother. I know what I saw." "Oh, really? And what did you see with those failing eyes of yours?" I snapped back, my patience at its breaking point. Her face flushed with anger, and she fumbled with the camera, finally shoving it in my direction. "See for yourself." I took the camera, half expecting some blurry photo taken from a distance, but there it was, a clear shot of Jake and me, mid-hug, smiling. Just a brother and sister enjoying a nice evening out. I couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to infuriate her more. "What's so funny?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Here, look." I handed the camera back to her. "Put on your glasses, Susan. It's just me and Jake." For a moment, she hesitated, then, muttering under her breath, she dug in her purse and pulled out her glasses. Slipping them on, she looked at the photo again. I watched her face change as she finally saw what was really there. "Now, I think it's time you left," I said firmly, my own resolve hardening. Susan looked like she wanted to argue more, but then she just nodded stiffly and headed for the door. "This isn't over," she muttered as she left. The few weeks Lucas was home felt like a dream. We were inseparable, catching up on lost time, and for a brief period, I could almost forget about the constant cloud of tension that was his mother, Susan. But like all good things, it came to an end too quickly. Soon enough, Lucas was packing his bags again for another extended business trip. I braced myself for the usual loneliness that accompanied his departures, but this time a new complication arose. Susan decided to move in. She showed up at our doorstep one afternoon, suitcase in tow, announcing her stay as if it were the most natural decision in the world. "It's for the good of the family, Tessa. I'm here to make sure you don't get into any trouble," she declared, pushing past me into the living room. I called Lucas immediately, my voice shaking with frustration. "She can't just move in here, Lucas. You need to talk to her." Lucas sighed on the other end of the line. "Tessa, please, just try to get along. I don't want to fight with her about this. It's only for a few weeks." Reluctantly, I agreed, but hanging up the phone, I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. Susan wasted no time taking over the household. That first weekend, she followed me around, critiquing every little thing I did. "You're folding those towels all wrong," she'd say, or, "You missed a spot there, do it again." She even took over the kitchen, her worst idea yet. Due to her deteriorating eyesight, she constantly oversalted or overpeppered everything, but whenever the food turned out barely edible, she blamed me. "You must have distracted me," she'd snap, or, "You're trying to sabotage my cooking." During the weekdays, her behavior grew even more suffocating. She sat in the living room, a notebook in her lap, jotting down the times I left for work and came home. Any time I was delayed, even by traffic, she'd greet me with a sneer. "Late again, Busy day or busy boyfriend?" "It was traffic, Susan. Like it is for millions of people every day," I'd retort, my patience fraying at the edges. Her insinuations were relentless, and each day ended with me locking myself in the bedroom, fuming but helpless. Lucas's request echoed in my mind, keeping me from unleashing the torrent of anger I felt. A month into Susan's invasive stay at our house, I finally got the news I'd been waiting for: a promotion at work. This wasn't just any promotion. It came with the opportunity for training at our company's main branch in another city. I'd been eyeing this chance for years, a real step up in my career. When I told Lucas over the phone, his excitement for me was palpable, even through the distance. "That's incredible, babe. I'm so proud of you," he enthused. "Don't worry about the time apart. It'll fly by, and we'll be back together before you know it." Despite the distance and the issues with his mother, his support was unwavering. It bolstered my spirits, filled me with warmth and determination. But then there was Susan. I broke the news to her one evening, trying to keep the conversation light and straightforward. "Susan, I've been promoted. I'll need to go to another city for a while to train," I explained, hoping to sound as nonchalant as possible. Her reaction was as expected, sour and accusatory. "So, you're running off to another city now? What's really there, Tessa? A lover?" she spat, her words dripping with venom. I sighed, frustration bubbling inside. "It's for training, Susan. There's no lover." "Why is that so hard for you to believe?" She snorted, her expression twisted in disbelief. "Sure, training. Just convenient timing, isn't it? As soon as Lucas is gone, you find a reason to leave too." I shook my head, unable to hide my irritation. "Believe what you want, Susan. I'm going, and that's final." With Lucas's blessing ringing in my ears, I packed my bags that night, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of my own home. Susan's persistent mistrust and conspiracy theories had drained me, and the idea of a few weeks away felt like a breath of fresh air. Once I settled into my temporary apartment in the new city, the sense of freedom was palpable. No Susan lurking around every corner, no insinuations or bitter comments at every turn. I was doing well in training, making new connections, and actually enjoying my evenings in peace. I found myself thinking, more than once, how pleasant life was without Susan watching my every move. But then, one ordinary afternoon as I returned from a session, my phone pinged with a new voice message from Susan. The content of that message turned my newfound peace upside down. "Tessa, I hope you're enjoying your time with your lovers, because you won't have a home to come back to. I've taken care of everything. The house is sold. Stay where you are, for all I care." Her voice, cold and triumphant, sent chills down my spine. I replayed the message, my mind racing. It couldn't be true. Lucas hadn't mentioned anything, and he owned the house, nothing could be done without his signature. Yet, the malicious glee in Susan's voice couldn't be ignored. What had she done? I called Lucas immediately, panic edging my voice, but the call went straight to voicemail. With him still on his business trip and likely in meetings or on a flight, I felt helpless, stuck in another city, the seeds of doubt Susan had planted now sprouting relentless anxiety. As the days passed with no return call from Lucas, my mind conjured up all sorts of disastrous scenarios. Had Susan forged his signature? Was it even legally possible to sell the house like that? The questions tormented me, gnawing at my focus and sleep. Despite the turmoil, I forced myself to continue with the training. I had worked too hard to let Susan's potentially empty threats derail my progress here. By the end of the training program, I was mentally exhausted, not just from the courses, but from the emotional roller coaster Susan had sent me on. I walked into the house, my mind still reeling from the chaos of the past few weeks. There, in the middle of the living room, stood Susan, squinting at me as if she couldn't quite make out who I was. She wasn't wearing her glasses again, which explained the unsure look on her face. But as I got closer, her expression shifted to one of smug triumph. "Welcome back, Tessa," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous cheerfulness. "I have some news for you." I dropped my bag by the door, bracing myself. "What now, Susan?" She thrust a stack of papers at me. "Here, read this. It's all settled. The house has been sold. You don't belong here anymore, or in this family for that matter." Her words were cold, calculated. Her claim was so outrageous that for a moment, I was too shocked to speak. "What are you talking about? Lucas would never agree to sell our house without discussing it with me first." "Oh, but he did. And he's tired, Tessa. Tired of your endless affairs," she added, a harsh edge to her voice. I snatched the papers from her hands, my heart pounding as I flipped through them. My eyes scanned the document quickly at first, then more carefully as something caught my attention. A laugh escaped my lips, not from amusement but from sheer disbelief. Susan looked at me, puzzled and clearly irritated. "What's so funny?" "Here," I said, pushing the papers back into her hands. "Put on your glasses and read it aloud. Read what you've signed." Reluctantly, she fumbled for her glasses, put them on, and started reading. "This agreement, made and entered into this day by and between." Her voice faltered as she continued, the realization dawning slowly. "This isn't a sale contract. It's a loan agreement for consulting services?" "Yes, Susan. That's right. You didn't sell the house. You signed up for a high-interest loan from some scam artists who took advantage of you." Susan's face went pale, her hands trembling as she held the document. "But I thought I was selling the house. There was an ad in the paper, and the man was so convincing. He said it could all be done without bothering Lucas with the details, that it was better this way." "You thought you'd sell my house out from under me? Without even a real check on what you were signing?" I was incredulous, anger and disbelief warring within me. Tears started streaming down her face, her earlier composure crumbling. "I just wanted to protect my son from you and your infidelities. I didn't mean for this to happen. I forgot my glasses, and everything seemed so legitimate." I stared at her, the weight of everything she'd put me through bearing down on me. Susan, you have gone too far this time. You need to leave. Now. With a heavy heart but a clear resolve, I watched as Susan packed a few belongings into her bag, still sobbing, still muttering apologies. As she walked out the door, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. When Lucas returned from his business trip, I had a lot to tell him. As soon as he put down his bags, I started to unload everything that had happened, from Susan's attempted deception to the fake documents. He listened, his face growing tighter and more serious with every detail I shared. After I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just staring at the ground. Then, he looked up, his jaw set. "This is unbelievable. It's time we taught Mom a serious lesson. What she planned to do was way out of line," he said, his voice firm and angry. However, the next day, after a tearful confrontation with Susan, where she pleaded ignorance and desperation, Lucas decided we needed legal advice. We consulted a lawyer to understand the full implications of what Susan had done. The lawyer was pretty clear. "From a legal standpoint, your mother-in-law voluntarily took out that loan and signed the contract. She's liable for the repayment," he explained in a no-nonsense tone. Susan's face when she heard that news was something I could never forget. She had thought she could manipulate her way out of the situation, but reality hit hard. She was on the hook for a significant amount of money, and there was no easy way out. She had to find a job, and fast. Within weeks, she started working 2 shifts, just to make ends meet. With Susan now occupied and no longer having time to meddle in our lives, Lucas and I finally found some peace. We decided it was a good time to take a break, to give ourselves a chance to heal and bond again after the chaos. We went to Hawaii for a second honeymoon, and it was blissful. We talked a lot about our future during those long, leisurely walks along the beach. "I think we're ready to think about having a baby, don't you?" Lucas said one evening, the sunset casting warm glows on his face. I smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Yes, I do. Let's enjoy being us for a bit longer, and then let's go for it." "Sounds perfect," he replied, kissing me gently. Now, back from Hawaii, life feels lighter, simpler. We spend our weekends planning the garden, redecorating the house, just enjoying each other's company. Lucas supports me in everything, including my career and our future family plans. We've discussed timelines, how we're going to manage our work-life balance, and how excited we are to be parents. It's a new chapter for us, one that's filled with hope and looking forward. As a retail manager, it felt like every door in the industry slammed shut right in front of me. Months of job hunting led nowhere. It was Lisa, one of my oldest friends, who finally threw me a lifeline, albeit not the kind I expected. "Tessa, why don't you help out Tom?" she suggested one afternoon as we sipped coffee at my cramped kitchen table. "His place is a mess since his wife passed, and he could use someone to tidy up and maybe look after Jamie, the little one." I needed the cash. Desperation edged out pride, and I agreed. Lisa set up the meeting, and 2 days later, I found myself standing at Tom's door, my stomach in knots. Tom opened the door, a man in his mid-40s, with weary blue eyes and a tentative smile. "You must be Tessa. Lisa told me a lot about you. Come in, don't just stand there." The apartment was larger than I expected, a bit of dust here and there, but it felt like a place sucked dry of life, echoing with a silence that spoke of its missing joy. "Let me show you around," Tom said as he led me through the living room filled with pictures of a woman with a bright smile, his late wife, I assumed. We moved on to the kitchen, which looked like it hadn't seen a proper cleaning in weeks. "I know it's a mess. I'm not around much, work and all. And Jamie, well, he's 9. You can imagine." Tom chuckled dryly, his gaze flicking away. "There is also Mike, my eldest son, but he lives separately." There was an awkward silence before he hastily added, "So, about the job, I guess Lisa told you the basics?" "Yeah, cleaning, cooking a bit, and helping Jamie with his homework?" I confirmed. "That's about it. You'll have free run of the place during the day." I just I just really need someone to keep things afloat here. I nodded, understanding the weight of his admission. I can do that, Tom. You can count on me. He showed a small, relieved smile. Thanks, Tessa. Let's see how it goes, yeah? Tom introduced me to Jamie that evening. The kid was a mop of untidy hair with curious eyes and a suspicious look as he sized me up from his spot on the living room couch. You gonna be our new maid? He asked bluntly, his voice sharp. I guess you could say that. But I'm also here to help you out with your studies and stuff, I replied, trying to make my tone as friendly as possible. As I left their apartment that day, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. This was not the life I had planned, but somehow, it felt like exactly where I needed to be. The early days at Tom's apartment were like walking a tightrope. I kept busy scrubbing, cooking, and learning the ropes of managing a household that wasn't mine. It wasn't long before the place started looking more like a home than a storage unit. Tom seemed appreciative, though he was a man of few words. One Tuesday morning, I was elbow-deep in suds, scrubbing a stubborn stain off a frying pan when Jamie wandered into the kitchen. His hair was even messier than usual, and he had that scowl that seemed glued to his face. Hey, you missed a spot, he said, pointing at a corner of the floor I hadn't gotten to yet. I rinsed the pan and turned to him, wiping my hands on my apron. Want to give me a hand? I asked. He rolled his eyes. No way, that's your job. Sure, but wouldn't hurt to help out a bit. Maybe learn something useful. I shot back with a half smile, hoping to tease a bit of cooperation out of him. Jamie huffed, crossing his arms. Whatever. That afternoon, I caught him struggling with his math homework. Numbers spread out on the table like they were parts of a puzzle he couldn't put together. I sat down next to him, my fingers tapping the table lightly. Stuck? I asked, glancing at the jumble of equations. It's dumb. I don't get why I gotta learn this crap, he muttered, shoving the workbook away. Let me show you something, I said, pulling the book back between us. For the next hour, I broke down the problems into steps that even I would have understood back in school. Slowly, Jamie started getting the hang of it, and when he solved the last problem on his own, he couldn't hide a proud grin. As days turned into weeks, I found myself more involved in their lives than I'd originally signed up for. Tom started coming home earlier, sometimes even helping with dinner. One evening, while I was chopping vegetables, he leaned against the counter, watching me work. You've changed things around here, Tessa. For the better, he said, his voice low and sincere. More than that. You're making us a family again. The word family hung in the air, heavy, but not unwelcome. I nodded, unsure of what to say, focusing instead on the carrots I was slicing. Tessa, Tom continued, hesitating for a moment. I was thinking, maybe it's time we made this arrangement a bit more permanent. I stopped chopping, my heart skipping a beat. Permanent? Yeah, I mean, if you're up for it. I could use someone like you around, long term. Not just for the cleaning and cooking, but, you know, for everything. The offer caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, considering the weight of his words. I'd like that, Tom. I really would. From that point on, things felt different. Easier, somehow. Jamie started calling me by my first name instead of the maid, and Tom treated me more like a partner than an employee. We settled into a comfortable routine, the three of us, like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their right place. Tom proposed one chilly evening, Jamie asleep, and his voice was steady, but his hands shook just a bit. Tessa, I don't have much to offer but myself and this family. Will you marry me? He had asked, his eyes hopeful yet scared of rejection. I didn't need a second to think about it. Yes, Tom. Yes, I will. But not everyone was thrilled. When I told my mom, she was less than enthusiastic. He's 14 years older than you, Tessa. And those kids. Are you ready to be a stepmom? Her skepticism was like a bucket of cold water. We love each other, Ma. That's what matters. And Jamie and Mike? They're great kids. I can handle it. I countered, but she wasn't convinced. And so, she came around, showing up at the mayor's office on our wedding day in her best dress, her smile tight but genuine. The ceremony was brief, the mayor reciting the vows with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd done this too many times. But when Tom slipped the ring on my finger, it felt like the world just paused for us. Starting our married life, I transitioned from the hired help to the lady of the house. It felt different waking up and not having to prove my worth through scrubbed floors and spotless counters. I was more than the cleaner now. I was a wife, a stepmom, part of a family. Life felt fuller, richer. But being a stepmom came with its own rulebook, one that nobody handed you, you just had to fumble through it. Jamie, who I'd thought of as my little buddy, suddenly seemed to realize I was in his mom's spot. "Why do you always have to tell me what to do?" he'd challenge, his little face scrunched up in annoyance. "Because I care about you, Jamie. It's part of my job now," I'd explain, trying to keep my tone light, but firm. And then there were the everyday adjustments, the dance of a new marriage. Tom had his ways I hadn't noticed when I was just the housekeeper. Like how he insisted on having dinner at exactly 6, or how the furniture shouldn't be moved even an inch from where Laura had placed it. "Tessa, why did you move the couch?" he'd ask, his voice more of confusion than anger. "Just trying something new, mixing it up a bit," I'd reply, pushing the couch back reluctantly under his watchful eyes. "Let's keep it the original way. It's how Laura liked it," he'd say, and that was that. Laura's ghost hovered in the corners, her touch lingering in the arrangement of cushions and photo frames. A few months later, Tom asked me to come to work for the sake of an additional source of income. It was okay, but I was upset by the demanding tone of his voice. I got a job at a store nearby to keep up with cooking and cleaning the house. Family life has not turned out to be as easy as I once imagined it would be. A year into our marriage, I started feeling like a guest in what was supposed to be my home. Tom seemed to have rules that never came up when we were dating, like an invisible playbook I wasn't privy to. It all came to a head one afternoon when I decided to switch out the old rug in the bathroom. It was a simple change, nothing drastic, just a new rug to brighten up the space. But when Tom came home and saw it, you'd think I'd redecorated the whole apartment. "What's this?" He stood in the bathroom doorway, his brow furrowed as he pointed at the rug. "A new rug. The old one was getting moldy," I said, trying to keep my voice light, hoping to head off any drama. "Why didn't you ask me? You know how I feel about changing things around here." His tone was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "I didn't think a rug would be a big deal, Tom." I felt my defenses rising. "Well, it is. I want things left the way they were." He was practically glaring at me now, and the intensity caught me off guard. That night at dinner, things went from bad to worse. Tom's younger son, Jamie, had been struggling at school, and somehow that was my fault too. "Jamie's grades are slipping. What's going on with his homework?" Tom asked, his eyes fixed on me across the table. "I've been busy, Tom. I started that job at the store, remember? You wanted me to help out with money," I replied, my voice tight with frustration. "So you're just going to let everything else slide?" He was accusatory now, his voice raising a notch. "I'm doing my best here," I shot back, feeling the weight of his expectations crushing me. "It doesn't seem good enough. The house is a mess, and you're not keeping up with Jamie like you used to. Laura would have handled it better." The mention of his late wife was a low blow, and it hit its mark. I was silent, the hurt too deep to respond. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. The troubles didn't stop at Tom. Jamie, seeing how his father treated me, started pushing boundaries too. One evening, I caught him up late on his computer, way past his bedtime. "Jamie, it's late. You need to turn off the computer and go to bed," I said as calmly as I could. "You're not my mom. You can't tell me what to do." His voice was loud, challenging. "I'm not trying to be your mom, Jamie. But you have school tomorrow, and you need your rest." He scoffed, turning back to his screen. "Whatever, Dad," he yelled, calling for backup. Tom came in, his face set in a hard line. Let him be, Tessa. He's fine. But he needs to sleep. It's not good for him to stay up so late. He's my son, I think I know what's best for him. Tom's tone was final, leaving no room for argument. Feeling undermined and disrespected, I retreated, the gap between us growing wider by the day. I started to feel like nothing more than a housekeeper, a nanny, someone who was there to cook and clean and then step out of the way. The day I got a bonus at work should have been a joyous occasion. With the extra money, I did something I hadn't done in a long while. I bought myself a new dress. It was nothing extravagant, just a simple, pretty thing that made me feel good when I tried it on. I was wearing the dress when I got home, a small smile playing on my lips as I imagined Tom's surprise. He noticed all right, but not the way I had hoped. "What's that?" he asked, his tone harsh as he eyed my new purchase. "It's just a dress, Tom. I bought it with my bonus," I said, twirling a little to show it off, trying to lighten the mood. "A bonus, huh? And you thought the best thing to spend it on was a dress?" His voice rose with each word. I stopped twirling, feeling the happiness drain out of me. I thought it was okay to treat myself. "Treat yourself?" Tom scoffed. "That money could have gone to something we actually needed. Like bills. Or saving up for something important." Before I could respond, Jamie chimed in from the doorway, his voice bitter. "Yeah, or maybe a new console that I've been asking for." I looked from Jamie to Tom, my heart sinking. It was my bonus. I just wanted something nice. The room filled with a heavy silence, Tom's eyes cold and unyielding, Jamie's stare accusing. That night, they both started treating me like I was invisible, not a word or a glance in my direction unless absolutely necessary. This silent treatment went on for a week. Meals passed in silence, my attempts at conversation met with cold shoulders and dismissive grunts. It was like I didn't exist in my own home. But life has a way of testing you with more than you think you can handle. A couple of years later, during the pandemic, my mother passed away. It was a sudden and heart-wrenching loss, leaving me to inherit the family house, a large, old structure, along with a significant sum of money. When I told Tom about the inheritance, his eyes lit up in a way that made me uncomfortable. "We'll move there," he declared one evening, looking over the property papers. "It's bigger, and the school near there is perfect for Jamie." I nodded, too drained from grieving to argue or to ponder his sudden interest in my inheritance. "Yes, maybe a new place will give us a fresh start," I said, hoping his intentions were as genuine as my wishes. "We'll start packing up this weekend," Tom decided, already making plans. Packing was a slow process, each item a memory, each box a step toward a new life I hoped would be better. As the moving day approached, I found myself observing Tom and Jamie, watching them discuss room arrangements and renovations for the new house. Their enthusiasm was hard to gauge. Was it for the new start or for what the new house represented? That morning, I wasn't feeling great, my head was pounding, and my stomach was in knots. The store manager noticed my pale face and sent me home early, something I was grateful for. I let myself in with my key, expecting the usual silence, but instead, I was met with low, conspiratorial voices drifting from Tom's makeshift office. Instinctively, I pressed myself against the wall by the door, my breath catching in my throat as I listened. "Yeah, Dad, thanks for setting that up. Leaving the apartment to me is a big help," said Mike, Tom's eldest son, his voice a mix of gratitude and scheming. "No problem, Mike. Once we move into Tessa's place, I'll have more than enough. We'll live there a bit, I'll spend her money, and then I'll find a good reason to divorce her. We'll split the assets, easy." Tom's voice was cold, calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. The pain of the betrayal was sharp, like a knife twisting in my gut. Mike laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Man, your new girlfriend is way hotter than Tessa. Can't wait for you to ditch that stupid chicken." I stood frozen, not wanting to alert them to my presence. After a few moments, I quietly backed away from the door, my mind racing. The initial shock was giving way to a burning, seething anger. I had to act, but I needed to be smart. I left the apartment as silently as I had entered and headed straight to the lawyer's office. The lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, was a sharp-eyed man who listened intently as I laid everything out. "This is more common than you'd think," he said, his voice even. "But you've got a good head on your shoulders, and we'll make sure you come out of this on top." I nodded, feeling a semblance of control returning. "What are the next steps?" I asked. "We file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and deception. Gather any evidence you can. Recordings, documents, anything that shows his intent," Mr. Reynolds advised. "Thank you. I'll get everything ready," I said, standing up. The weight of the legal folder in my hand felt like a shield, something to protect me from the storm ahead. As I walked home, my mind was a whirl of plans and possibilities. When I returned home, Tom was in the kitchen, making dinner as if nothing had happened. Mike had left, and the normalcy of the scene was almost surreal. "Hey, you're back early. Feeling any better?" Tom asked, looking up from the stove. I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "A bit, yeah. Just tired," I said, keeping my voice light. "That's good. Dinner will be ready soon. Why don't you go lie down for a bit?" he suggested, turning back to his cooking. "Sure, I might just do that," I said, my voice sweet as syrup, but inside, I was steeling myself for the battle ahead. I went to our room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed. The next few weeks would define the rest of my life. I wasn't just going to roll over and let Tom take everything from me, not without a fight. The morning of the move felt different. I had everything planned down to the last detail, and Tom had no clue about the storm that was about to hit him. I'd packed my personal belongings quietly over the past few weeks and had them moved to a new place in another city, a fresh start, a new me. This morning, I left the house as usual, a simple handbag in tow, telling Tom I was off to work early. "See you at the new house later," he called out nonchalantly, completely unaware of the bomb about to drop. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Sure, see you there," I lied smoothly, closing the door behind me with a soft click that marked the end of my old life. Meanwhile, Tom and Jamie were supposed to meet the movers at my inherited house and relocate our family there. What Tom didn't know was that there was no family to relocate anymore, and that house wasn't ours to call home any longer. I waited patiently in my new apartment, my heart racing as I pictured the scene unfolding at the old house. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed, a message from my neighbor who was keeping an eye out. "He's there, looks confused," it read. Tom must have been standing at the door, expecting to walk into his new life. Instead, he was greeted by strangers, the new owners of the house I had sold right from under him. I imagined his face, the confusion morphing into realization and then anger as he processed the betrayal. According to my neighbor, Tom knocked on the door, and a confused couple opened it, introducing themselves. "We just bought this place. Who are you?" they would have asked, just as baffled by the presence of a moving truck full of furniture. The movers, equally perplexed, started asking where to put the boxes, and Tom, flustered and furious, tried to call me. My phone lit up with his number, but I ignored it, sticking to the plan. When no answers came, he had no choice but to return to his apartment, where another surprise awaited him. Mike, his eldest son, had moved in his own furniture, and his fiancée was already unpacking. The apartment was no longer Tom's sanctuary but a crowded mess of broken plans and shattered expectations. "Get out! This is still my place!" Tom must have roared, the vein in his neck throbbing with rage. "Dad, we gave up the lease on our apartment. We've got nowhere to go," Mike shot back, defiant and desperate. Finally, I picked up the phone after his third, more frantic call. Tom's voice was livid, tinged with a betrayal he thought only he was capable of. "Tessa, what the hell do you think you're doing? Why are you ruining everything?" I took a deep breath, my voice calm and resolute. "I know about everything, Tom. The plans you made with Mike, the girlfriend, your charming little comments. I've sold the house and protected my assets. You won't use me anymore. You can't do this to me. We're married. His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. The divorce papers are in your mailbox, I replied firmly. Consider this me looking out for myself. You'll also find that I will be asking for alimony. I didn't pick up his calls after that. My old phone, the one he knew the number to, would soon be turned off for good. I sat back, a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was free, truly free for the first time in what felt like forever. The courtroom was charged with tension. My ex-husband Tom sat across from me, his face a mask of fury and desperation. He was gunning for half of everything I owned, but I was armed with the truth, and a stellar lawyer. My lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, was a no-nonsense type who had every piece of evidence neatly organized and ready to dismantle Tom's claims. Your Honor, we have substantial proof of Mr. Wright's infidelity, and we intend to show that his demands for property share are not only baseless but also immoral, he stated confidently as the proceedings began. Tom's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a broken man wronged by his wife's sudden departure, but it fell flat as soon as Mr. Reynolds presented the evidence. Receipts from lavish dinners, hotel bookings for two, and love letters to another woman, every item displayed on the projector screen was another nail in the coffin of Tom's credibility. When it was time for testimonies, a couple of acquaintances from our old neighborhood took the stand. They didn't mince words. I saw him at the lake with her. They were all over each other like teenagers. One testified, her tone disgusted. Tom's lawyer tried to counter, arguing about the legitimacy and relevance of the evidence, but it was clear the judge wasn't buying it. The atmosphere was thick with Tom's silent rage, I could almost feel it across the room. Finally, the judge delivered her verdict. Given the evidence of infidelity and deception presented by the plaintiff, I find it impossible to grant any property claims to Mr. Wright. Furthermore, considering the income disparity, Mr. Wright is ordered to pay alimony. Tom's face went from red to white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It was a sight I didn't enjoy, but it was justice, plain and simple. His mistress had left him once she realized there was no lavish lifestyle waiting for her, especially when she found out she'd have to share an apartment with his sons and his eldest son's fiancée. I'm not going to be a free housekeeper, she'd said, echoing the irony of my past with Tom. As for Tom, he ended up exactly where he put himself. His battles with his eldest son over space and responsibilities were the stuff of local gossip. Jamie, the younger one, turned into a defiant teenager, harder to handle every day without a steady maternal influence. Meanwhile, I was building a new life far from that chaos. I took up courses in graphic design, something I'd always had a knack for but never pursued. The community here was vibrant and supportive, helping me network and establish a small freelance business. I was happy starting over. Our house was a palace, sure, but a cold and echoing one. Marble floors, fancy furniture that looked like it belonged on TV, not under my feet, that was my life. Dad, Richard the Great they called him at his construction company, built it all from scratch. He loved me to pieces, his only kid, but seeing him was like catching a glimpse of a shooting star, there and gone too fast. Gotta chase that next project, kiddo, he'd say with a wink, his booming voice the only warmth in the giant house. My mom, Isabella, well, she was the ice queen on a frozen throne. 18 years younger than Dad, she had cheekbones sharper than a diamond and a closet bigger than my entire room, overflowing with clothes that sparkled like disco balls. Her days were a whirlwind of fancy salons with French names I couldn't pronounce, massages that cost more than my bike, and gossip sessions with her friends who looked like they were all carved from the same mold. The only time Mom ever seemed to remember I existed was when she needed someone to boss around. Those jeans are a mess, honey. She'd sneer, her voice dripping with fake sugar. Haven't I taught you how to keep things tidy? Funny thing was, the house was spotless, thanks to a whole army of maids who scurried around like silent mice. But if I dared to sit down and watch cartoons after school, here she'd come, faster than a cheetah after lunch. Shouldn't you be learning something useful, Lily? She'd snap, her perfectly painted nails tapping a sharp rhythm on the counter. Like how to clean these floors properly before you ruin them? Useful? Cleaning floors? I looked at Dad, who was just coming through the door, grass stains on his jeans and a smile on his face. He'd been playing catch with the neighborhood kids again. "Leave her alone, Isabella," he'd rumble, his voice warm and deep. "She's got plenty of time for chores later. How about some ice cream sundaes, champ?" My treat. Dad was my hero, my best friend. He'd wrestle with me on the floor, his booming laugh filling the house, a stark contrast to Mom's constant complaints. He taught me how to throw a perfect spiral, how to fix a leaky faucet, and most importantly, how to be kind, even when the world felt cold and empty, just like this giant house. The year I turned 15 was supposed to be different. Driver's ed, maybe a summer job at the ice cream shop down the street, all the normal teenage stuff. Instead, it became the year everything went sideways, faster than a roller coaster gone rogue. It started with a cough. A nagging, wet cough that wouldn't quit. Dad, who could usually shake off a cold in a day, just kept getting worse. His booming laugh faded into a raspy wheeze, his once strong hands grew thin and trembled slightly when he held mine. Doctors became a constant presence in our house. Stern-faced men and women who spoke in hushed tones that sent chills down my spine. A cruel diagnosis, laryngeal cancer. Dad, ever the optimist, kept a brave face. "Just a little bug," he'd say, his voice weak but his eyes full of the same warmth I knew and loved. "Nothing a few trips to the doc can't fix." Those trips turned into hospital stays, harsh treatments that left him drained and pale. The vibrant man who could build a skyscraper from the ground up was reduced to a frail shadow, his once booming voice barely a whisper. I spent every spare minute by his bedside, holding his hand, reading him stories, praying for a miracle. "Don't worry, champ," he'd rasp, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right." Worry? I was drowning in it. The thought of a world without Dad's booming laugh, his rough but comforting hugs, was unbearable. Mom, however, remained a constant source of irritation. While Dad fought for his life, she continued her self-absorbed routine. "Honestly, Richard," she'd complain, her voice clipped and cold, "you're giving me a headache with all this coughing. Maybe you should just sleep in the guest room, it's keeping me awake." One thing I did notice, though, was a subtle shift in her appearance. Maybe it was just me, but her designer clothes seemed to fit a little tighter, her perfectly flat stomach developing a slight bulge. It was a bizarre contrast to Dad's worsening condition, a small, unsettling detail amidst the storm. Then came the day, a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Mom was on her way out, a fresh manicure appointment awaiting her. "Don't forget the black polish, darling," she called back from the doorway. "Black always goes best with morning." Morning? What was she talking about? Before I could question it, the phone rang. Mom answered, her voice dripping with fake concern. A few moments later, she hung up, her face a mask. "Well," she sighed, a strange, almost satisfied glint in her eyes. "Looks like today needs to be a black manicure after all." My heart hammered in my chest. A cold dread wrapped its icy fingers around me. What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Mom's mask slipped for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something cold and calculating crossing her face before it was replaced by a perfectly practiced frown. "Just some unfortunate news, Lily," she said, her voice back to its usual icy tone. "Looks like you'll be needing a strong woman to take care of you now." The days that followed were a blur of black crepe and forced smiles. The funeral home transformed our living room into a sterile, flower-filled showroom. Mom, ever the drama queen, reveled in the attention. "Black lace or sweetheart neckline?" she agonized, parading a seemingly endless stream of dresses in front of the mirror. Her friend, a woman with bleached blonde hair and a permanent pout, cooed in approval. "Oh darling, the sweetheart neckline. So Audrey Hepburn at her husband's funeral. Absolutely tragic and chic. Don't you think it's a little excessive?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes narrowed. Excessive? Honey, this is for your father. We need to show his friends and family how much we respected him. Respected? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. By showing off your cleavage? The air crackled with tension. Mom's perfectly painted smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of something cold and dangerous. You watch your tone, young lady, she hissed, her voice low and menacing. These are adult matters you wouldn't understand. The adult matters turned out to be endless phone calls with florists and caterers, each conversation punctuated by Mom's theatrical sighs and demands for the absolute best. My grandparents, bless their hearts, tried to shield me from the worst of it, but the strained silences and worried glances spoke volumes. The funeral itself was a performance. Mom, draped in a ridiculously elaborate black dress that clung to her curse like a second skin, played the grieving widow to the hilt. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face as she clung to the arms of various concerned-looking relatives. Later that night, as I scrolled through social media in a daze, a familiar face popped up on my feed. There she was, Mom, in all her tragic and chic glory, the funeral photo plastered across her Instagram page. The caption, dripping with saccharine sentiment, spoke of her undying love and devotion to my father. The love of my life, gone too soon, it read. A week had crawled by since Dad's funeral, each day a heavy weight on my chest. Mom, however, seemed to thrive in the silence. The endless parade of black dresses was replaced by a return to her usual flamboyant wardrobe, her smile a little too bright, her eyes a little too cold. One evening, as I trudged up the stairs after another day of forced pleasantries at school, the sound of unfamiliar laughter filtered through the air. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The living room door was ajar, light spilling out into the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I peeked inside. There, sprawled on our plush sofa, was a young man who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a fitness magazine. He was all tanned skin, perfect teeth, and designer stubble. Mom, perched beside him like a preening peacock, was batting her eyelashes with a practiced innocence I hadn't seen since I was a toddler. Lily, she purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. This is Michael, my fiancé. Fiancé? I repeated, my voice barely a croak. Mom's smile faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before it was replaced by a too bright cheer. Yes, darling. Isn't that wonderful? Michael is going to be living with us now. Michael, who hadn't even acknowledged my existence until now, finally grunted a greeting. Before I could process this latest absurdity, Mom continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. And guess what else, honey bunch? We're expecting. Expecting? My mind reeled. Not only did she have a new husband-to-be a week after Dad's funeral, but she was also pregnant? It was all too much to take in. What about, Dad? I stammered, the words catching in my throat. Isn't this a little? A little what? Mom snapped, her mask of cheer slipping for a moment. A little inconvenient? Don't be ridiculous. Life goes on, darling. And besides, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Michael here makes me truly happy. Something your father, bless his soul, was never quite capable of. Fury, hot and raw, bubbled up inside me. You never loved him, did you? I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You cheated on him. Mom's eyes narrowed. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by a steely glint. Perhaps, she admitted with a cold laugh. But that's none of your concern, is it? Now, from now on, you'll do as Michael and I say. You'll help with the housework, of course, and then you'll be a wonderful nanny to your new sibling. Over my dead body, I choked out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Don't get sassy with me, young lady, Mom hissed, her voice low and dangerous. This is my house, and you'll do what I tell you, or you'll get out. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I straightened my spine, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. I wouldn't stay under the same roof with you for another minute even if you begged me, I declared, my gaze unwavering. You may have gotten rid of Dad, but you won't control me. Mom's face contorted in fury. Get out then, she shrieked, lunging towards me. She grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me out the door. And don't come crawling back when you have nowhere else to go, she bellowed after me. I didn't answer. The front door slammed shut behind me with a satisfying thud. Snow swirled around the streetlights, casting an eerie glow on the deserted sidewalk. I was in my school clothes and sneakers, completely unprepared for the winter chill. But the sting of the cold was nothing compared to the burning betrayal in my heart. Looking down at my flimsy clothes, I spotted the abandoned garage across the street. Dad used to keep his old tools and some winter gear there. Maybe, just maybe, there was something I could use to keep warm for the short walk. The garage was a treasure trove of forgotten memories. In the back corner, under a dusty tarp, I spotted a familiar shape, Dad's old hunting jacket. It was worn and faded, but the thick leather promised some protection from the biting wind. With shaking hands, I dialed a taxi, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. The wait seemed to stretch on forever, each passing minute a small eternity. Finally, the headlights pierced the darkness, a beacon of hope in the cold night. My grandparents' porch light cast a warm glow as I stepped out of the taxi. Tears welled up in my eyes again, this time a mix of relief and sorrow. My grandma opened the door before I could even knock, her face etched with worry. Lily? What on earth? Her voice trailed off as she took in my appearance. Honey, you're freezing. Come in, come in. She ushered me inside, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders. Grandpa was right behind her, his face grim as he took in my tear-streaked cheeks and the oversized jacket. What happened, sweetheart? He asked, his voice gruff but full of concern. I took a shaky breath, the warmth of the house slowly seeping into my bones. Then, in a torrent of words, I poured out everything, Mom's cold behavior after Dad's death, the fiancé, the pregnancy, and finally, the cruel revelation. My voice cracked as I spoke, the raw pain and betrayal spilling out into the room. By the time I finished, I was sobbing uncontrollably, my body racked with hurt. Grandma held me tight, her silence a comforting presence. Grandpa, after a moment, cleared his throat. There's something you should know, Lily, he began, his voice low and serious. Before your father passed away. He paused, his gaze flickering to Grandma before continuing. He knew all about her cheating and pregnancy, and well. He hesitated, then met my eyes. He had a lawyer come in and change his will. My heart skipped a beat. Change his will? Yes, Grandma chimed in, taking my hand. You see, honey, your father loved you more than anything in the world. It means that you are the sole heir to your father's estate. My jaw dropped. Everything? Everything, Grandma confirmed with a sad smile. But because of your age, you can't fully access the money until you graduate from college. Until then, a legal guardian needs to manage it. Not Mom, I blurted out before he could finish. The thought of her controlling Dad's money meant for me, was unbearable. Grandpa and Grandma exchanged a knowing look. Of course not, Grandma said, her voice firm. That's why we need to talk about custody. But to take you away from your mother, we need proof of her unsuitability. Proof? I reached for my phone, a mischievous glint entering my eyes. I have plenty of that. Over the past year, in a misguided attempt to protect myself, I'd started recording some of my arguments with Mom. The last conversation, the one where she kicked me out, was there in all its ugly glory. With trembling fingers, I played it back for my grandparents. The sound of my mother's cruel words filled the room, each sentence a fresh blow. By the time the recording ended, a tense silence hung heavy in the air. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. This is more than enough, Lily. We'll get you a lawyer first thing tomorrow. You won't be going back to that house. Relief washed over me, warm and welcome. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about safety, about being in a place where I was loved and valued. A week had crawled by since the blow-up with Mom. One sunny and cold afternoon, as I was helping Grandma cook a pie, a loud, insistent pounding shattered the quiet. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Grandma straightened up, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "That sounds like trouble," she muttered, brushing her hands off the flour. Before we could even exchange another word, the front door swung open with a bang, revealing a sight that made my blood run cold. Mom stood there, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Her hair was a mess, her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, and her eyes held a manic glint that sent shivers down my spine. "There you are," she shrieked, her voice laced with a barely contained fury. "You little ingrate. How could you do this to me?" Grandma stepped forward, her voice firm but unwavering. "Lily doesn't have to do anything, dear. She's here of her own free will." Mom scoffed, her gaze darting around the room before landing on me. "Free will? Don't be ridiculous. You've filled her head with lies about me." "Lies?" I echoed, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're the one who lied, Mom. You lied to Dad, you lied to me, and now you have the nerve to play the victim? You never loved me and Dad." Mom's face contorted in fury. "Don't you dare talk about your father like that. And love? You think that dusty old man was capable of love? He was boring, Lily. A drag. I deserved more." Her words hung heavy in the air, a cruel and selfish justification for her actions. My fists clenched at my sides, the anger bubbling inside me threatening to boil over. "So you married him for money, then cheated on him while he was still alive?" I spat, my voice dripping with disgust. "And now you're angry because you're not going to get your claws into his inheritance?" Mom's face turned ashen, her bravado crumbling under the weight of my words. "Look," she said, her voice cracking with desperation, "I know I messed up. But can't we just forget all that? I found out about the new will, Lily. You have everything now. You can help me, can't you? I'm pregnant, for crying out loud. I have nowhere to go." Her words hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea for a lifeline. A part of me, a tiny, insignificant part, flickered with a misplaced sense of pity. But then I remembered the countless nights I'd spent alone. "Those were your choices, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "And now you have to face the consequences." 2 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers, court dates, social worker visits, it felt like my life had become a legal drama. Mom, unsurprisingly, contested the custody hearing tooth and nail. The courtroom was a tense battleground. Mom, dressed in a cheap-looking suit and overly dramatic makeup, sat across from me, a picture of fake concern. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "I am Lily's mother. I love her dearly, and I'm her only living parent. Taking her away from me would be a travesty." Her words were like nails on a chalkboard, a stark contrast to the cruel reality I knew. My lawyer, a sharp woman with a steely gaze, wasted no time in presenting her case. The recordings I'd made played on a small speaker in the courtroom, each snipped conversation a damning indictment of Mom's character. Her voice, dripping with contempt and frustration, filled the room, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Then came the final blow, the recording of the night she kicked me out. The raw fear and confusion in my voice, the chilling indifference in hers, painted a picture 1,000 words couldn't express. As the last recording ended, a heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. Even the judge, a stern but fair-looking woman, seemed taken aback. Looking directly at Mom, I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your Honor," I said, "does this sound like the voice of a loving mother? Does this sound like someone who deserves to raise a child?" Mom opened her mouth to retort, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. "The evidence presented is compelling," she said, her voice firm. "The recordings paint a clear picture of a dysfunctional and emotionally abusive relationship. Mrs. Miller," she addressed my mother directly, "your behavior towards your daughter has been documented and deemed unacceptable. Therefore, this court grants full custody of Lily to her grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it felt like I could breathe again for the first time in months. Grandma reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Grandpa, ever stoic, offered me a gruff but genuine smile. A few days later, we stood outside the house I'd once called home. The eviction notice, a cold formality, felt like a badge of honor. Mom and her now fuming boyfriend were huddled by the door, their faces a mixture of anger and desperation. "Lily, honey, please," Mom whined, her voice laced with desperation. "Can't we just talk about this? I know I messed up, but I'm your mother. And I'm pregnant. We have nowhere to go." She gestured dramatically to her noticeably swollen belly, a desperate attempt to tug at my heartstrings. But this time it didn't work. "You had your chance, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. Besides," I added, "you have Dad's savings, enough for a decent apartment and a comfortable life for you and your new family." The mention of the money hit a nerve. Mom's face contorted in fury, but this time, it was laced with a hint of fear. "You wouldn't dare cut me off," she hissed, her voice brittle. "I don't have to," I replied coolly. "You'll have access to a monthly stipend, enough to cover your basic needs. But that's all. Consider it my charity." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but the look in my eyes must have stopped her. With a final glare in my direction, she stormed off, her boyfriend trailing behind like a kicked puppy. 5 years had melted away like summer snow. Graduation from high school was a bittersweet affair, a celebration of achievement tinged with the pang of leaving a familiar chapter behind. Now, with a brimming acceptance letter in hand, I stood on the precipice of a new adventure, college. The University of Economics loomed ahead, a bustling hive of knowledge and ambition. Grandma fussed over my dorm room, insisting on rearranging the furniture for maximum efficiency. Grandpa, ever the pragmatist, helped me set up my laptop and internet connection, muttering about the outrageous cost of higher education. "Don't worry, Grandpa," I said, giving him a hug. "I'll make the most of it. This is Dad's company I'll be running someday, remember?" He squeezed me back, his gruff voice softening. "That's my girl. Your father would be proud." The mention of Dad always brought a lump to my throat. These past years had been a constant dance between grief and gratitude. Grief for the father I barely had the chance to know, and gratitude for the loving grandparents who had stepped up when I needed them most. College life was a whirlwind of lectures, study groups, and caffeine-fueled all-nighters. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into it with a fervor that surprised even myself. News about Mom trickled in occasionally, delivered in hushed tones by well-meaning family friends. Apparently, she'd given birth to a stillborn child, a tragedy that had only deepened the chasm between her and the world. Her boyfriend, the one who'd abandoned ship when the comfortable life in a luxurious house evaporated, was nowhere to be seen. Honestly, none of it fazed me. The woman who had borne me was a stranger, a ghost from a past life. I had no room for negativity in my life, not when I was busy building a future where hard work and determination were the cornerstones of success. Hi, I'm Emily. Born to Ava, a once glamorous model, and Jake, a guy who knew his way around a camera, I was supposed to be their golden ticket to keep the lavish lifestyle they were scared of losing. "Look at her, Jake. She's perfect. That face could relaunch my brand," Mom said, hovering over my crib with that calculating gleam in her eyes. I was too young to remember, of course, but she'd repeat that story like a broken record as if proud of her foresight. Dad, a man of few words, snapped photos, turning our home into a studio. "Just one more, Ava. She's tired," he'd often mutter during those endless sessions. "Nonsense. She's a natural, aren't you, baby?" Mom's voice was sugary sweet when she wanted something. It worked on everyone, Dad included. Growing up, I hardly noticed the constant clicks of the camera or Mom's relentless ambition. It was just how things were. My playdates? More like photo ops, with Mom directing every pose. Smile more, Emily. No, not like that. Think princess, not playground. She'd instruct, eyes darting between me and the lens. I tried to please her. Always tried. Maybe because every flash of the camera was paired with her rare, gleaming approval, or maybe because I didn't know anything else. Dinner time was no different. We didn't talk about school or friends. It was always about branding, shoots, and Mom's new ideas to keep her followers hooked. Eating healthy is not just good, it's marketable, Emily. Remember, you are what you eat, and right now, you're my little star. Mom explained one evening, her words slow and deliberate as if trying to sell the concept to a potential sponsor hidden in the bushes. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to shrink with each passing day, his voice seldom rising above a whisper. It's all good, Ava. Maybe we let her have some pizza tonight, eh? A cheat day. He'd suggest on rare occasions, a weak smile fleeting across his face. Her response was always sharp. And ruin her complexion? You know better than to mess with the routine, Jake. Routine, my constant companion. I knew nothing of lazy Sundays or messy ice cream faces. Everything was curated, my childhood laid out like a magazine spread. One night, I heard them arguing. Their voices, usually hushed around me, echoed through the halls. She's not just your ticket to fame, Ava. She's our daughter, not some prop. Dad's voice was tinged with frustration. Oh, grow up, Jake. We're not in some fairy tale. This is real life, and in real life, we capitalize on what we have. Emily is what we have. Mom shot back, her words slicing through any pretense of maternal warmth. I lay in bed, clutching my bear, Mr. Snuggles, trying to make sense of it all. The idea that I was more useful than loved wasn't new, but hearing it spelled out cracked something inside me. The next morning, things went back to normal. Mom was all smiles, pretending last night never happened. Dad avoided my eyes, his usual. Ready for your shoot, sweetheart? Mom chirped as she straightened my dress. Her hands felt cold, her smile too stretched. And so, we continued, the camera capturing smiles that never quite reached my eyes, in a house that felt more like a set every day. I played my part, the golden child, not yet understanding the shadows that played behind the scenes of our picture-perfect life. Grandma and Grandpa, they saw through it all. They'd visit, shaking their heads, whispering about how kids needed dirt and sun, not spotlights and scripts. Can't she just be a kid, Ava? Grandpa would grumble as soon as he stepped through the door, his brows furrowed in disapproval. Mom would force a smile, her patience thin. Dad, times have changed. Emily's opportunities are golden. We're setting her up for life. I'd watch from the corner, clutching a doll I wasn't allowed to dirty. Their visits were my only break from the constant clicks of Dad's camera. He'd put it down then, his face softening. Let's all just relax for the evening. How about a movie, everyone? Dad would suggest, his voice almost a plea. Mom's eyes would narrow, her lips pursed. Sure, after Emily finishes her shoot with the new organic juice line. It's just a few photos, then we can all relax, as you put it. The shoots weren't quick. They never were. Dad tried to keep things light, goofy faces behind the camera, to make me giggle on cue. Come on, pumpkin, show me the biggest smile. Think about, oh, ice cream. He'd cheer, hoping to catch a genuine moment. Mom didn't do patience. Jake, focus. We need these perfect. The company is watching closely. They want the natural, happy child, not some sugared-up toddler. The arguments got more heated when the camera was off. Grandma and Grandpa would try to steal me away for a weekend, desperate to give me a taste of normal. Ava, she should come stay with us. Just a few days. Let her run around, play in the mud. Grandpa would argue as he put on his coat, ready to leave, but not ready to give up. And what? Miss a casting call? No, Dad. We're not risking opportunities. She's fine. Mom would snap, her words final. It wasn't all bad. Sometimes, in the quiet mornings before Mom woke up, Dad would make pancakes, drizzling extra syrup and letting me toss in handfuls of chocolate chips. "Don't tell your mom," he'd wink, the secret sweet between us. "Promise," I'd giggle, the syrup sticky on my fingers, the moment light and free. But freedom was always fleeting. As soon as Mom's footsteps echoed down the hall, it was back to business. Hair brushed, face washed, and dressed in whatever outfit she'd laid out. In those days, I didn't understand the weight of sacrifice or the price of the path laid out before me. I only knew the routine, the constant push, and the clear understanding that my childhood wasn't really my own. It belonged to the brand, the image, the unspoken sacrifice of what could have been. When the sickness hit, it came without warning. One day, I was posing for a yogurt ad, all grins and giggles. The next, I was burning up, my body a battleground. Mom panicked, but not in the way you'd hope. Her first thought wasn't about getting me to a doctor, it was about how many shoots we'd have to cancel. "Ava, we need to get her to the hospital, now." Dad was pacing, his voice edged with a panic I'd rarely heard from him. "Just a minute, Jake. Let me think." Mom snapped back, her phone in one hand, probably scrolling through her calendar. "Think? She's burning up, Ava. This isn't about your bloody schedule." Dad's shout would have scared me if I weren't so out of it. In the hospital, they said it was polio. I didn't really understand then what it meant, only that it was bad, really bad. Mom's face went white when the doctor explained. "But she's been so healthy," Mom muttered to herself more than anyone else, her face twisted in confusion and anger. "Mrs. Dawson, Emily wasn't vaccinated against polio. It's extremely rare nowadays because most children are vaccinated," the doctor explained gently, a look of sympathy across his face. Dad looked like he'd been punched. "Not vaccinated? Ava, what, why?" Mom's lips thinned, her usual defense rising quick. "Don't you start on me, Jake. It was a choice we made." I was moved to a room, wires and tubes hooking me to machines that beeped and blinked. Days turned into weeks. I missed the sun, my sketches, even the annoying flash of Dad's camera. Mom rarely stayed long. She'd come in, sit for a bit, her foot tapping relentless on the sterile tiles. "Emily, you need to fight this. You know how much is riding on you getting better," she'd say, her voice tight, like she was negotiating a deal instead of comforting her daughter. More than anything, I wanted all of this to be just a bad dream, to wake up in my bed with Mr. Snuggles tight in my arms, ready for another day of pretend. But the nightmare was real, and it wasn't just the sickness. It was seeing the strain on Dad's face, hearing the impatience in Mom's voice, feeling the distance grow between who I was and who I was supposed to be. "Can't you just sit with her?" Dad's voice would rise sometimes when he thought I was sleeping. "She's scared, Ava. She needs us. She needs to get better. Sitting and coddling isn't going to fix her, Jake." Mom's reply, always sharp, like a slap. Days blurred together, each one a repeat of the last, beeps, whispers, and the heavy weight of knowing that to Mom, I was a project failing to meet its deadline. 2 years of my life blurred into a continuous loop of bed sheets, window views, and the ceaseless ticking of the clock. Bedridden, I became a fixture in my own home, an inconvenient piece of furniture rather than a daughter. Mom's irritation grew with each passing day, her frustration palpable every time she had to tend to me. Changing my diapers or washing me, she did it all with a grimace. "This is not what I signed up for," she'd mutter under her breath, her hands rough, her care lacking warmth. Dad tried to compensate. Every evening, he'd come into my room with a fairy tale book in hand, his voice a soft echo of better times. "Let's escape to a kingdom far away, Emily," he'd whisper, trying to lift my spirits as we dived into stories of brave heroes and far-off lands. But the daylight hours were long and lonely. Left to myself, I found solace in drawing. My sketches became my silent rebellion, my hidden diary. Crayons and pencils were my companions, crafting scenes far different from the sterile room I was confined to. I heard Mom's complaints, her selfish frustrations. She was tired of wearing the same outfits to parties because the money had dried up. "I'm stuck in last season's wardrobe while you lie around," she'd yell, her voice echoing off the walls, filled with a bitterness that cut deeper than the loneliness. Grandma and Grandpa saw the toll it was taking on me. They'd visit, laden with worry, their faces etched with concern. "Let her come stay with us for a while," Grandpa would suggest, his voice a gentle plea. "She needs a change of scenery, needs to feel loved." But Mom would have none of it. Absolutely not. What would people think if they knew I'd shipped her off to her grandparents? My image as a mother is at stake. Her voice was shrill, tinged with desperation. Her tantrums became more frequent, a testament to the crumbling facade of her once glamorous life. Dad's response was to retreat further into his shell, the bottle his only solace. Nights were filled with the sounds of Mom's crying fits and the clinking of Dad's glass. When I turned 8, a flicker of hope emerged as I began to slowly pull myself upright, leaning heavily on the bedpost. But one leg didn't cooperate. It was thinner, shorter, a lasting reminder of the illness that had ravaged my body. Mom dragged me to countless doctors, her face etched with a mix of hope and fear. "Is there nothing you can do?" she would demand, her tone sharp as she addressed the specialists. "I'm sorry, but these are post-polio complications. There's not much we can do to reverse this," the doctors would explain, their faces somber. The realization that I would never again be the perfect model child hit her like a storm. Rage replaced her initial shock. At home, she turned that rage on me. "Look what you've done to yourself," she'd scream. "If you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened. You've ruined everything." Her words stung, and I'd retreat further into my sketches, my only escape from her relentless blame. My drawings became darker, a mirror to the turmoil inside me. Yet, they also held a strange beauty, a testament to my endurance and my spirit, which refused to be crushed. Nights in my room were long and silent, filled only with the scratching of my pencils against paper as I lost myself in drawing worlds far kinder than my own. My comics became my sanctuary, a place where I was the hero, not the victim. "Why do you even bother with that stuff?" Mom's harsh voice would slice through the quiet as she barged into my room. "It's not like it's going to get us back on track. You should be focusing on something useful." I learned to just nod, not trusting my voice. My drawings hid under my bed, my fears and dreams bleeding onto the pages in secret. I had no friends to call, no schoolmates to lean on, my world was confined to these four walls. And the only connection I had to the outside was through my online classes and occasional, whispered phone calls with my grandparents who seemed to be the only ones who cared. One night, something changed. It was late, and the house was quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard it, muffled screams from downstairs. Heart pounding, I limped to my door, easing it open just enough to peek through. "I can't do this anymore, Jake. Look at her, look at what she's become." Mom's voice was frantic, laced with disgust. "I can't stand to look at her anymore." Dad's response was slurred, tired. "She's still our daughter, Ava. We can't just throw her away." "That's exactly what we're going to do," she snapped back. "Here, give her this and make it look like she ran away. Maybe some robber will do us a favor tonight and get rid of the geek." Dad's steps were heavy, his presence larger as he approached my room. The door creaked open, and there he stood, a silhouette of the man he once was, his eyes sad, his breath heavy with alcohol. "We're going for a drive, Em," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I could only nod, my whole body trembling as I followed him out to the car. We ended up in a part of town that even nightmares would hesitate to visit. Dad stopped the car, and his next words were barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I don't know what else to do." He handed me the phone, his hands shaking. "Keep this with you. Please forgive me." Then he left, just like that. I stood there, alone, the cold biting through my thin pajamas. My hands clutched the phone like a lifeline as sounds of distant fights filled the air. But they made one mistake, they left the SIM card in the phone. Shaking, I dialed Grandpa's number. "Grandpa, please, you have to help me. I'm scared. I don't know where I am." "Hold on, Emily. We're coming. Just stay hidden and keep the phone on." Grandpa's voice was firm, a promise in the dark. I hid behind a trash can, my body shaking from fear and cold, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Every noise made my heart jump, every shadow a monster in the dim street light. Finally, headlights swept around the corner, and Grandpa's car came into view. They had never driven so fast, and never had I felt so relieved to see them. Grandpa and Grandma rushed out, their arms wide open. After they rescued me, Grandpa and Grandma drove straight to Mom and Dad's house. They were furious, their anger crackling through the air like electricity. I stayed in the car, but I could hear the raised voices even from the driveway. "You've gone too far this time, Ava." Grandpa's voice boomed. "Please don't tell anyone," Mom pleaded, her voice cracking with fear. "Think about what they'll do to us." Grandma was relentless. "You're not fit to be her mother. You're signing over custody, Ava. Today." And just like that, they secured my freedom. Mom signed the papers, her tears of fear a far cry from repentance. Dad was silent, his head bowed, the fight gone out of him. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was peaceful. They had a small, cozy house with a big backyard and a garden that seemed enchanted, bursting with colors and life. Grandpa taught me how to plant flowers, his rough hands gentle on the earth. "Plants gotta be nurtured, just like people," he'd say, a smile tucked into his beard. Grandma was a whirlwind of love and baked goods. She always had a new recipe to try, and the kitchen was our laboratory. "Sugar fixes a lot of things, especially moods," she'd wink, passing me a spoonful of cookie dough. I started going to a regular school not long after moving in. I was nervous, limping distinctly, self-conscious about my leg. But to my surprise, the kids were kind. They didn't stare or whisper like I'd feared. Instead, they were curious, accepting. "Want to play with us?" a girl named Lucy asked during recess one day. "Sure," I replied, a grin breaking over my face, surprised by the simplicity of the moment, how easy it felt to just be a kid among others. Art class became my refuge, where I truly flourished. Mr. Hernandez, the art teacher, noticed my talent right away. "You've got a real gift, Emily. Ever thought about showing your work to the world?" he encouraged. Taking his advice, I started posting my drawings online. It was just a few sketches at first, but soon, I had followers, a community of people who didn't just see the drawings, they saw me. They understood the stories I was telling through my art. Evenings at home were my favorite time. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch, Grandpa with his pipe and Grandma with her knitting, the day winding down around us like a soft blanket. "Life's good, isn't it?" Grandpa would ask, looking out at the garden bathed in twilight. "It's wonderful," I'd answer, leaning against Grandma, feeling safe and loved in a way I hadn't known was possible. At 19, life threw me into a new chapter, art school, with a scholarship that recognized my talents. The girl who once sketched in secret was now a known name in the online art community. Even my characters jumped off the pages, finding their way onto comic book covers and city walls as graffiti. Enrolling in art school was a dream realized. It was my chance to dive deeper, to explore the roots of artistic expression through classical training. "You're going to rock this, Emily," Grandpa said on the day I received my acceptance letter, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Yeah, kid, show 'em how it's done," Grandma added, always quick to throw in her fiery support. The campus was buzzing with creativity, a place pulsing with potential. My first day felt like stepping into a larger world, one I was eager to explore and influence. Studying was intense, but fulfilling. I absorbed techniques and histories that made my work richer, more grounded. My professors encouraged experimentation, leading me to blend traditional methods with my unique style. "You have a rare gift, Emily. Your perspective is refreshing," Professor Ames noted during a critique, his words bolstering my confidence. Parallel to my studies, I organized an exhibition of my paintings. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was a narrative display, telling stories of overcoming and becoming. Each piece tells a story, doesn't it? A visitor remarked during the opening night, her eyes tracing the lines of my largest canvas. Absolutely. Each stroke has a part of my journey, I explained, finding joy in sharing my vision. The local media caught wind of my story, intrigued by the artist who conquered personal and physical challenges to create. They filmed reports at the exhibition, interviewing me about my work and life. Emily Dawson isn't just an artist, she's a phenomenon, one reporter said as the camera light blinked red. I walked through the exhibition, my special shoes, and sometimes a cane aiding my steps. I wasn't hiding my limp, I was owning it. You turn adversity into art, an art enthusiast commented, pointing at my cane, which I'd painted in bright colors. Photos of me appeared in fashion magazines again, a full circle moment. But this time, I posed because I wanted to, each photo a testament to my agency and artistry. She redefines beauty, read the caption under a photo of me, my painted cane in hand, standing boldly beside one of my vibrant murals. By the time I finished my degree, I wasn't just a graduate with honors, I was a symbol of perseverance, a living canvas of my own making. And as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, cane in hand, the applause wasn't just for my academic achievement but for the journey that brought me there. The art gallery buzzed with chatter and the click of cameras, the air electric with admiration for the work lining the walls. I mingled with guests, my heart swollen with pride and nerves. It was a big day, the culmination of years of hard work and passion. The space was filled with my paintings, each piece a chapter of my life, a battle fought and won. Out of nowhere, the atmosphere shifted. My heart stopped for a second when I saw them, my parents. They have changed a lot. Dad looked worn, more lines on his face, his eyes dimmer. Mom's beauty disappeared, revealing her true self. I watched, frozen, as Mom made her way to the reporters who were filming. With the flair of someone used to the spotlight, she announced loudly, "I'm Emily's mother, and I'm just so overwhelmed with pride for what she's accomplished." The camera swung to her, eating up her performance. She's always been incredibly talented, and seeing all she's achieved, it's a mother's dream come true. I couldn't take it. My body moved on its own, fueled by a mix of anger and disbelief. "No," I interrupted sharply, my voice slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "I owe everything to my grandparents. They are the reason I am who I am today." Away from the prying eyes and lenses of the media, I pulled my parents aside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mom's act dropped as soon as we were out of earshot, her eyes cold and calculating. "Emily, darling, we need your help," she began, the sweetness in her voice sickening. "Your father has had some troubles, he's lost his job, and we've had to sell the house. We have nowhere to go. You owe us, Emily." "I owed you nothing the moment you left me on that street," I shot back, my resolve hard as steel. "If you ever come near me or my grandparents, I'll go to the police." "Don't think I won't." They knew I meant every word. Without another word, they turned and left, disappearing back into the shadows from which they had emerged. That night, after the guests had left and the lights in the gallery dimmed, I took a moment to walk through the quiet space. My paintings looked back at me, each one a testament to my journey. I had faced my past, confronted the pain, and came out the other side stronger. Back home, in the quiet comfort of Grandma and Grandpa's house, I finally felt at peace. Here, in this house filled with love and acceptance, I knew I was home, truly home. Hey, I'm Ava. I run my own business making designer furniture. It's been a wild ride getting here by 33, but I wouldn't have it any other way. My life was mostly about work, though deep down, I hoped for more, like a family of my own. It was during one of my rare vacations down in Santa Cruz that everything changed. I was on the beach, trying to learn surfing, mostly failing and falling flat on my face into the waves. That's when Jake showed up with his surfboard under his arm, looking like he owned the place. "Need some help there?" he called out, jogging over. His voice was playful, a slight tease hanging in the air between us. I brushed the sand off my face, trying to look a bit less like a drowned rat. "Do I look like I need help?" He laughed, a deep, hearty sound that made me smile, despite my embarrassment. "Well, you ain't exactly riding the waves like a pro." I shrugged and gave him a challenging look. "Maybe I'm just enjoying my unique style of surfing. Ever thought of that?" "Unique's one word for it," he grinned, extending a hand to help me up. "Name's Jake. I teach surfing around here. How about I give you a few pointers? No charge." I figured why not. It wasn't like I had anything better to do, and the guy seemed genuine enough. So, I took him up on his offer. Turned out, Jake was a natural teacher. He was patient, explaining things clearly without making me feel like an idiot. "Balance is key," he instructed as he guided me on the board. "You gotta feel the wave, be part of it, not fight it." Easier said than done, but with Jake's guidance, I actually managed to stand and ride my first wave. I couldn't believe it. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off again. "That's it. You're a natural," Jake cheered, clapping his hands. I paddled back, flushed with excitement. "Thanks, Jake. I guess you're a pretty good teacher." That night, we talked like old friends. Turns out, Jake moved around a lot as a kid, never really settling anywhere until he hit the surf towns. He loved the ocean, said it was the only place he felt at home. "And what about you, Ava? What's your story?" I told him about my business, how I'd started from scratch, working day and night to make it something real. He listened, really listened. And that's how it started, really. A simple meeting on the beach that turned into dinner, and a conversation that felt like it could go on forever. I didn't know then that I'd fall for him, hard and fast. But that comes later. For now, it was just two people, laughing over fish tacos, the ocean whispering in the background. I smiled. Maybe I'd just found that someone. Life after meeting Jake took a fast track, like a runaway train I had no interest in stopping. Our courtship was a whirlwind, filled with laughter, beach days, and long, heartfelt conversations under the stars. It didn't take long before he popped the question. We were at our favorite spot on the beach, the same place where we first met. "Hey Ava," Jake started, his voice unusually shaky. "You and me, we're kinda great together, huh?" I laughed, a little nervous, sensing something big was coming. "Kinda great? That's the understatement of the year." He took a deep breath and went down on one knee, right there in the sand. "Marry me, Ava. Let's not just be kinda great. Let's be amazing, together, forever." My heart skipped about a dozen beats. "Yes," I blurted out, more tears in my eyes than I'd care to admit. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jake." The wedding was everything I could have hoped for. It wasn't large, just close friends and family at a small chapel near the beach. The reception was at a local hall, decorated with simple flowers and strings of lights that made everything feel magical. But as we settled into married life, I started to see sides of Jake I hadn't known before. He loved the finer things, expensive clothes, high-end gadgets, and soon, a sleek sports car that ate up more money than I wanted to think about. One evening, as I was working through some designs, Jake strolled into my office, a glossy brochure in hand. "Hey babe, check this out," he said, laying the brochure on my desk. I glanced at it, my stomach dropping as I saw the price tag on the car he was pointing at. "Jake, this is really expensive. Are you sure we can manage this right now?" He leaned back, a frown creasing his brow. "Come on, Ava. You make good money, right? We can afford a little luxury." I sighed, knowing I'd regret it, but also not wanting to fight. "Fine, but this is a big purchase. We should be careful with spending for a while." "Trust me, babe, it's all under control," he assured me, but his casual dismissal of my concerns stung more than I expected. His parents, too, became a regular fixture in our lives. His mom, Marlene, and dad, Phil, were charming at first. They'd often come over, praising the house, the food, everything. But soon, every visit came with requests. "Ava, dear, you have such good taste. Could you help us pick out some new curtains? We just don't know what to get," Marlene would say, her eyes darting around our living room appreciatively. Sure, I helped. I even paid, thinking it was no big deal, a way to make them feel welcome. One night, after they'd left from one of their many visits, I collapsed onto the couch next to Jake, exhaustion nipping at my heels. "Your parents are really taking this family thing seriously, huh?" He chuckled, not catching my tone. "Yeah, they love you. You're like the daughter they never had." I bit my lip, not sure how to say what was on my mind without causing a rift. "It's just, they expect a lot. Gifts, money, time. It's getting to be a bit much, don't you think?" Jake's face hardened a little, his voice sharp. "They're just being friendly, Ava. They like spending time with us, that's all." I wanted to argue, to tell him it felt like more than that, like we were a bank they could take from without asking. But I held my tongue, the words "happy wife, happy life" echoing ironically in my head. Jake's attitude toward having kids started to put a real strain on us. I always knew I wanted to be a mom, but Jake's insistence on having a son was something else. It wasn't just a wish, it was an obsession. One night, after dinner, we sat down in the living room, each with a glass of wine, trying to unwind. That's when I decided to bring up the topic again. "So, Jake, do you really think it's that important to have a boy?" I asked, feeling my stomach knot up. Jake looked up then, his expression serious. "Of course, Ava. You know how important it is for me to have a son. Someone to carry on the family name, you know?" "But what if we have a daughter?" I pressed, needing him to see my point of view. He shrugged, a bit too casually. "We keep trying until we get a boy, I guess." The simplicity in his answer chilled me. "And what, the daughters we might have aren't good enough?" "Ava, come on, don't start that," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not about good enough. It's about having a son. My dad's the same way, you know that." The conversation hung heavily between us, unresolved. It was the same every time. Jake wanted a son so badly that it started to overshadow everything else in our relationship. When we learned that natural conception was off the table, IVF seemed like our only option. I threw myself into the process, researching clinics and treatments. The day we went to the clinic to start the treatment, the air between us was tense. In the waiting room, Jake fiddled with the pamphlets on the coffee table, his knee bouncing up and down nervously. "So, they can do that thing, right? Where they make sure we get a boy?" he whispered, leaning close. I frowned. "It's not that simple, Jake. And it's not exactly ethical to pick and choose like you're ordering a custom car." The strain only deepened once we were in the thick of IVF treatments. The hormones, the doctor's appointments, and the waiting were brutal. And through it all, Jake's impatience for a son grew into something ugly, a shadow over our marriage. When we finally got the news that we were expecting, I was over the moon. But Jake's first question cut through my happiness like a knife. "Did they say if it's a boy?" "It's too early to tell," I snapped, hurt by his one-track mind. And when the ultrasound revealed we were having twin girls, I saw the disappointment on his face. He tried to mask it, but it was too late, I'd seen it. That night, as we lay in bed facing away from each other, the distance between us felt wider than ever. When I gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Ellie, I was over the moon, but Jake, he couldn't hide his disappointment. He wanted a son so badly it clouded everything else. One evening, while the girls were cooing in their crib, Jake came into the nursery. The look on his face was serious, like he was about to say something important. "Ava, we need to try again for a son," he said bluntly, no preamble. I was taken aback. "Jake, look at what we've got. They're perfect. Why isn't this enough?" He paced a little, before stopping and turning to face me. "It's not about them not being enough. It's about continuing the family name, Ava. You know this." I sighed, feeling the weight of his expectations pressing down on me. We'll see, I replied, not committing but not dismissing him either. It was the easiest way to end the conversation without another argument. Not long after, life decided to test me again. Phil, Jake's dad, got seriously ill. One evening, Marlene, his mom, came over, wringing her hands with worry. Ava, the surgery Phil needs, it's urgent, and his insurance won't cover all of it. We need $50,000. The amount made me choke a little. That's a lot, Marlene. I know, dear, but we're desperate. We wouldn't ask if there was any other way. I thought about it, the businesswoman in me kicking in. I can lend you the money, but I'll need you to sign a receipt. It's just a safety measure. Marlene bristled a bit at that. Really, Ava, a receipt? We're family. I stood firm. It's nothing personal, Marlene. It's just how I handle things professionally. It's a lot of money. Reluctantly, she agreed, and the receipt was signed. Jake didn't take it well when he found out. You made my mom sign a receipt? What's wrong with you, Ava? It's how I protect our future, Jake. And it's for our girls. I shot back, frustrated at having to justify myself. Things settled down a bit until the girls were about 6 months old. That's when I found out I was pregnant again, naturally this time. I was shocked and happy but scared to tell Jake. His reaction was just as I feared. A son, Ava. It has to be a son. I don't need another girl, he said coldly when I told him. Months later, I gave birth to another beautiful girl. I named her Mia. Jake didn't come to the hospital, not even to see Mia or help me home. I ended up taking a taxi, 1,000 worries in my head. When I got home, the house was quiet except for the sound of the babysitter in the nursery. Jake wasn't there. He came back the next day, looking like he hadn't slept at home. Where were you? I asked, my voice tight with a mix of anger and despair. Out, was all he said, walking past me like I wasn't even there. He didn't even glance at Mia, his own daughter. The hurt from that cut deeper than anything else. Here I was, trying to keep our family together, and there he was, pulling further away every day. It was clear to me then that something had to change. Things had been rough since Mia was born, and they weren't getting any easier. Jake was hardly ever home, always at work, or so he said, and whenever he was around, he was distant, detached. Our financial arrangement had become a sore point. He stopped contributing to the household, saying, "You make enough for both of us, Ava. Handle it." Trying to discuss our issues felt like talking to a brick wall. He'd come home late, often just as I was putting the girls to bed, avoiding any real conversation. Even my in-laws added to the strain. Marlene would come over, not to see the girls, but to ask for favors or gifts. "Ava, dear, could you help me pick out a new microwave? You always choose the best appliances," she'd say, her compliments thinly veiling her true intentions. She barely glanced at her granddaughters playing on the floor beside her. Phil, after recovering from his surgery, didn't hold back his thoughts either. During one of his rare visits, he said bluntly, "We hoped for a grandson, Ava. These girls, they're fine, but a boy would have been better." But the real shock came when Jake stumbled in one night, looking more frazzled than usual. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Ava, I screwed up. Big time," he blurted out, sinking onto the sofa with his head in his hands. "What happened? Talk to me, Jake." "I lost money, a lot of it. At the casino. I've got creditors on my back now. They're not the kind of people you can just brush off," he admitted, his voice laced with panic. Fear gripped my heart, not just for our financial security, but for his safety. "How much, Jake?" $25,000, he whispered. Despite everything, my instinct was to protect him, our family. "Okay, we'll handle this. But you have to promise me, no more gambling. Ever." "I swear, Ava. No more gambling. I can't lose you, or the girls." So, I did what I thought was necessary. I transferred $25,000 to clear his debts. After that, Jake's demeanor changed overnight. He was home more, engaged with the girls, constantly showering me with affection and gratitude. "You saved me, Ava. I don't know how to thank you enough," he'd say, kissing me goodbye in the mornings. Things had been looking up for a while, with Jake seemingly back on track and us spending more time as a family. I actually started to believe that maybe we had turned a corner, that maybe everything would be alright. But that hope shattered the night Jake didn't come home. I stayed up all night, pacing the floor, trying his phone over and over, but it just rang out. No answer. My mind raced with all sorts of dreadful thoughts. Had something happened to him? Or was it something else? By the time he walked through the door early the next morning, my relief turned to anger the moment I saw him casually stroll in and head straight to bed without so much as an explanation. "Where have you been all night?" I demanded, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. He mumbled something incoherent and pulled the covers over his head. "Tired, talk later," he said, his voice muffled by the pillow. "No, we're talking now, Jake. You can't just disappear and not expect me to worry." But he was already snoring, completely oblivious to my panic or anger. That was the last straw. I decided then and there that I needed to know what was really going on. The next day, I hired a private detective. A week later, the detective came back with news that crushed whatever was left of my trust. Jake had a mistress, and she was pregnant. Pregnant with a son. The irony of it stung like salt in a wound. But what cut even deeper was learning that the $25,000 I gave Jake to cover his supposed debts hadn't gone to any creditors. Instead, he'd bought his mistress a new car, a thank you present for carrying his son. I was seething with rage when I called Marlene, my mother-in-law, hoping for some semblance of support. "Marlene, Jake has a mistress, and she's pregnant. And he bought her a car with the money that was supposed to pay off his debts," I said, my voice shaking with fury and disbelief. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Marlene's voice, cold and sharp, came through. "Well, maybe if you had given him a son, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you blaming me? For not having a son? That's why you think it's okay for your son to cheat?" "He needs an heir, Ava. It's important for men in our family to have a son," she insisted, as if that justified everything. "So my daughters mean nothing? Is that it?" I was nearly yelling now, my heart pounding in my chest. "Ava, you need to calm down and stop overreacting. It's not the end of the world. You just need to take better care of yourself, be more attractive, maybe then my son wouldn't need to go elsewhere." The call ended with her hanging up on me, leaving me stunned and furious. The betrayal from Jake was one thing, but the betrayal from someone I considered family was too much. It was clear to me now that Jake and his family would never change. They'd chosen their path, and I needed to choose mine. Revenge wasn't a path I ever thought I'd take, but at that moment, it felt like the only way to reclaim some semblance of dignity. My next calls were to my lawyer, Claire, known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. "Claire, I'm through being the understanding wife. It's time to push back, hard. I want full custody, and I want him to pay for what he's done," I told her, my voice steely. That evening, when Jake came home, I was ready for him. The moment he walked through the door, I could see the arrogance in his stance, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. "Jake, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. He smirked, tossing his keys on the table. "What's up? Another lecture about how I should spend my time?" "No, not a lecture. I know about your mistress, and the child. I'm done. Here," I said, pushing the divorce papers across the table to him. "I've signed them. It's over." His smirk vanished, replaced by a frown. "You're serious? Look, I'm tired of this life too. Your constant nagging, the kids screaming. I was going to leave anyway." "Good. You should leave. But first, the car keys. You'll return the car and the $25,000 you spent on your girlfriend. It wasn't your money to spend. I demanded, my tone unyielding. He scoffed. Come on, Ava, be reasonable. I need that money for my son. You can't do this to me. You can't just strip me of everything. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm adding a lawsuit for the emotional distress you caused. You and your mistress will both pay, I declared, the finality in my voice echoing in the room. The legal battle that followed was intense. Jake tried to argue that he had no money, that I was being unreasonable and cruel. But the evidence was stacked against him, the transactions, the messages, his continual deceit. It was all laid bare for the court to see. The judge was stern as he handed down the verdict. Mr. Thompson, it seems you've not only breached the trust of your marriage, but also misused funds for personal gain at the expense of your family. You are hereby ordered to pay $20,000 in damages to Mrs. Thompson, another $20,000 from your mistress, and $400 per month per child in alimony. Jake's face during the ruling was a picture of shock and defeat. Forced to take out a loan, he had to scramble to cover the payments ordered by the court. The courtroom drama had barely settled when my in-laws decided to confront me. They stormed into my house like a hurricane, blaming me for everything under the sun. You've destroyed our family and ruined our son, Marlene shouted, waving her arms dramatically. Phil chimed in, his voice just as accusing. You took everything from him, made him out to be a monster. I listened quietly, letting them vent their anger and frustration. They hurled insult after insult, but I stood my ground, the calm in the storm. After they had exhausted their tirade, I calmly pulled out the receipt for the $50,000 I had loaned them for Phil's surgery. You owe me $50,000. I was generous then, but now I need that money back. Their anger turned to panic. We don't have that kind of money, Ava. We're old, we're not working, Marlene pleaded, tears starting to form in her eyes. That's not my problem. You signed an agreement. You owe me this money, I stated firmly, my resolve unshaken by their distress. Seeing that I wasn't backing down, Phil resignedly nodded. We'll find a way. We'll pay you back. True to their word, they took out a loan to pay me back and had to return to work to manage the payments. It was tough for them, but it was the consequence of their actions and decisions. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. I focused on raising my daughters and running my business. Despite the challenges, I never regretted standing up for myself. My girls were thriving, growing more beautiful and intelligent each day, and my business was doing well, giving us a comfortable life. Jake's fate turned out quite differently. Burdened by debt and unable to keep up with the financial demands of his actions, he was forced to work multiple jobs. He left his mistress after she gave birth to a daughter, not the son he so desperately wanted. The irony of it wasn't lost on me, but I felt no pleasure in his misfortunes. Months later, a knock came at my door. It was Marlene and Phil, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Ava, we've been thinking a lot about what happened. We're sorry, Marlene started, her voice trembling. Phil nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. We miss the girls. We were wondering if, maybe we could see them? I looked at them, seeing the genuine regret in their eyes, but the pain they had inflicted was too deep, and their betrayal too significant. I appreciate your apology, I began, my voice steady. But I can't let you back into our lives. Not after everything. The girls are doing well, and we're moving on. It's better this way. Marlene's eyes filled with tears, and Phil placed a hand on her shoulder. We understand. We wanted to try, Phil said, his voice thick with emotion. I wish you the best, but please respect our wishes and give us our space, I replied, closing the door gently but firmly. Turning back to my home, to the laughter of my daughters playing in the living room, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had come through so much, their little faces reminders of why every struggle was worth it. I had made tough decisions, but they were the right ones for us. Hi, I'm Anna. Been crunching numbers as an accountant for the better part of a decade now. My husband, John, works in IT, a real tech wizard, which comes in handy more often than you'd think. We've got 2 kids, Lucas and Lily, a pair of energetic sprouts who keep our lives colorful and, honestly, a bit chaotic. We've just moved into our new house, a dream I've had since the kids were born. You see, John and I decided early on that we wanted a proper home for the kids to grow up in, not just any place would do. So, we scrimped and saved, and finally, after years of both of us grinding away, we managed to buy our own place. The house wasn't just a building, it was a promise we made to each other and to our kids. The day we moved in, I remember standing in the empty living room before the furniture arrived, envisioning the memories we'd create. John wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "We did it, babe. We're home." "Yeah, we did it," I replied, my voice a mix of exhaustion and elation. "Let's just hope we survive the decorating part without killing each other." We spent that evening sorting through boxes, assembling furniture, and laying down rules for the kids, simple stuff, like no markers on the walls and no cookies in bed. It was late when we finally crashed, the sound of the kids even breathing from the next rooms, the best kind of lullaby. Things were good. Settling in took less time than I thought, mostly because I decided to work from home. My boss, bless his heart, was more supportive than I'd hoped. He let me handle the company's accounts remotely, as long as I kept up my numbers, and I always do. It wasn't more than a couple of months after the move that we got a surprise. I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out if the coffee maker was just complicated or if I was caffeine deprived, when I heard a knock at the door. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I opened the door and there stood Susan, John's mom. My mother-in-law had that look about her, the kind that said she was up to something but you wouldn't figure it out until it was too late. "Susan, this is a surprise. What brings you here?" I managed to keep my voice steady, but internally, I was already bracing myself. "Oh, Anna, darling, I just missed my grandkids so much. And you know, I've always dreamed of living in a big house like this," she said, her eyes darting around, already making herself at home without an invitation. John came down the stairs, having heard his mother's voice. "Mom, you should have called. We would have picked you up." "Nonsense, I wanted to surprise you. Besides, it's time I spent some quality time with my grandkids," Susan declared, planting a loud kiss on John's cheek. I glanced at John, trying to gauge his reaction. He shrugged slightly, a silent message that read, "What can we do?" It had been a week since Susan plunked herself in our living room. Every morning, I'd tiptoe past her makeshift bedroom to the kitchen, the tension as thick as the burnt toast I'd toss in the trash before anyone could smell it. The whole arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but with each passing day, the discomfort burrowed deeper into our home life. That Tuesday, I had to scoot out early for a rare in-person meeting at work, which meant slipping on real shoes and trading my sweatpants for slacks. As I was leaving, Susan was just a silhouette under the blankets on the couch. I whispered a goodbye to the kids and left before the sun was fully up. When I returned, the house was eerily quiet. I called out, "Lucas? Lily," expecting to hear them thundering down the stairs. Instead, Susan appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her smile wide like she'd won the lottery. "Anna, dear, come see what I've done upstairs." A little surprise for everyone. Her enthusiasm grated on my nerves, but I followed, my curiosity piqued despite my apprehension. As we reached the top of the stairs, the first thing I noticed was the stark emptiness of Lucas's room. My heart sank. Where all his superhero posters had been, now hung drab curtains and pictures of landscapes that screamed boring adult lives here. "What the hell, Susan?" The words flew out of my mouth before I could catch them. She flung her arms wide, as if presenting on a game show. I moved Lucas into Lily's room. "They're young, they can share, can't they? And look, I brought up some of my things to make it more comfortable for me." I stormed into Lily's room, now cluttered with 2 sets of everything, and my kids sitting on the bed looking miserable. Lucas's eyes were red, and Lily's lip quivered. "Mom, why do we have to share now? We had our own rooms," Lucas complained, his voice cracking. "I know, honey. I didn't know about this, I said, my voice soft but seething inside as I turned to face Susan. I sold my house to be closer to you all. I have nowhere else to go, she declared, a triumphant look in her eye. I felt the room spin a bit. You what? John didn't tell me that. Well, he knows now. And this is my room now. End of discussion, she said, walking into Lucas's old room and shutting the door with a definitive thud. I gathered the kids and went downstairs, my mind racing. When John got home, I was waiting for him, the kids eating their dinner quietly, the tension thick. John, we need to talk. Now, I said, pulling him aside as soon as he walked through the door. Your mother's moved into Lucas's room. Moved the kids into the same room without asking us. And she told me she sold her house. He ran his hands through his hair, looking as shocked as I felt. She sold her house? She didn't tell me that. This is crazy. I'll talk to her. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, John knocked on his mother's door, trying to talk some sense into her. The muffled voices went back and forth, his tone pleading, hers defiant. I sat on our bed, thinking about how our dream home had quickly turned into a battleground. John came back an hour later, looking defeated. She won't budge. Says this is her right. I'm sorry, Anna. I don't know what to do. Every day was a new adventure and patience. I had set up my office in the corner of our bedroom, the only spot I could claim as somewhat quiet for my work calls. My job as an accountant wasn't something you could pause and play at your convenience, but try explaining that to Susan. This particular Thursday, I was deep into reconciling some accounts, my laptop spread with spreadsheets and reports, when Susan barged in, a bag of shopping swinging from her arm. Anna, you spend all day on that thing. Don't you ever take a break? She chided, not caring that I was mid-call with a client. Susan, I'm on a call, I hissed, covering the microphone with my hand, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Oh, it sounds more like you're chatting with a girlfriend. She chuckled and shrugged, setting down her shopping on the table, spreading her latest treasures across my work area. I muted the call, my heart pounding. Susan, I need this space to be clear. I'm working. Working? Looks more like you're just fiddling on the computer. Back in my day, work meant getting your hands dirty, she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Unwilling to argue further, I unmuted the call and tried to focus, but my concentration had shattered. As I wrapped up the call, Susan had already floated away, probably to stow her new haul of discount buys, useless figurines and out-of-fashion clothes that seemed to multiply each day. Later that afternoon, the sound of crying broke my concentration again. It was Lucas, sobbing over something in the living room. Dropping everything, I rushed to him, finding him holding an empty comic book sleeve. Mom, my Spider-Man comics are gone. I left them right here. My heart sank. Let's go ask Susan, sweetie. Maybe she moved them. We found Susan in her room, the door ajar, surrounded by piles of her shopping conquests. Susan, did you see Lucas's comics? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She glanced up, her nose wrinkling in disgust. Those old things? I threw them out. They were cluttering up the living room, and I can't stand spiders. Creepy, crawling things. No need for that nonsense in the house. Lucas's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. But Grandma, they were my favorite. Spider-Man isn't real. He doesn't crawl. I don't care. I don't like them, and they're gone, Susan snapped, turning back to her clutter. As Lucas calmed down, I stepped into the hallway, my mind racing. Susan's disregard for what wasn't hers was growing unbearable. Every inch of space was slowly being consumed by her belongings, her rules, her presence. From the crack of dawn to the hush of night, Susan's presence was like a cloud, casting a shadow over our family's daily life. And with each passing day, her comments and criticisms grew sharper, cutting into the fabric of our routine and comfort. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had just finished getting the kids ready for school when Susan decided to comment on my appearance. Anna, when was the last time you had a manicure? You really should try to keep yourself up, you know. I glanced down at my hands, nails chipped from household chores, and typing furiously on my laptop. I've been busy, Susan. You know, taking care of the kids and working from home. She said, shaking her head. A little effort wouldn't hurt. John would appreciate it. Ignoring the sting of her words, I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. But as soon as I served the eggs and toast, Susan was on to her next critique. Is this how you usually cook? It's a bit bland, dear. You really should take some cooking lessons. The kids ate silently, casting me worried glances. I forced a smile, trying to keep the morning from souring further. Later that day, when the kids came home from school, their laughter and lively chatter filled the house. It was a sound I cherished, one that Susan apparently found annoying. Kids, could you keep it down? I'm trying to watch my shows, she called out from the living room, her tone sharp and commanding. The kids shuffled away, and I felt my frustration mounting. Not wanting to argue in front of them, I retreated to the kitchen, only to overhear Susan mumbling about the noise. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Susan decided it was time to lecture me on my role in the family. Anna, I think it's time we start dinner with a little thank you to John. After all, he's the one providing for all of us. I clenched my jaw, setting down my fork. Actually, Susan, I pay the mortgage. That's $2,800 a month from my salary. Susan waved her hand dismissively as John chimed in. Mom, Anna's right. She's the one handling the mortgage. I take care of other expenses, but we both contribute equally. Oh, please. Susan scoffed. If it weren't for my son, you wouldn't have this house or your comforts. John's face tightened, and he looked like he was about to argue further, but he caught my eye and let out a sigh. We had been through this conversation too many times already. The meal passed with an uncomfortable silence, the clinking of cutlery punctuating the tension. After clearing the dishes, I found myself in the laundry room, folding clothes more aggressively than necessary. John came in, his expression weary. Anna, I'm sorry about my mom. I don't know what to do to make her understand. I folded a shirt and stacked it with a little too much force. I don't know either, John. But we can't go on like this. It's like walking on eggshells in our own home. We'll figure something out, John said, though the assurance sounded hollow. Maybe we can sit her down and talk it through again. Lay out everything clearly. I nodded, though doubt nagged at me. Susan had made up her mind about how things should be, and it seemed no amount of talking would change her view. This morning started just like any other Tuesday, with me dropping the kids off at school, before heading back to the house. I was prepping for an important online conference with my boss and a couple of key executives from the company, a meeting that could significantly impact my career. However, the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The house was bustling with noise, laughter, and the clinking of dishes. Susan had invited her friends over for an impromptu breakfast gathering, apparently turning our living room into her personal social club. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I poured myself a quick cup of coffee. Trying to stay calm, I headed to my office, hoping to find some sanctuary. As I settled down, adjusting my webcam and reviewing my notes one last time, I could hear the muffled chatter and laughter from the living room. I tried my best to block it out, focusing on the upcoming discussion. But just as the meeting started and I began to explain the quarterly projections, the door to my office flew open. Susan, leading her troop of friends, burst in loudly asking, Anna, why didn't you make us some coffee too? And where's our breakfast? You can't just ignore your guests. Stunned, I muted my microphone, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Susan, I'm in the middle of a work meeting. Can this wait? I hissed, trying to keep my voice low and calm. No, it can't. You think because you're working, you can neglect your duties as a hostess? Susan retorted, her voice rising with every word. Frustrated, I pointed at her sharply. Keep it down, I'm working. In response, Susan's expression twisted into one of defiance, and in a dramatic gesture, she grabbed my laptop and threw it onto the floor. The screen went black, the sound of my boss's voice cut off abruptly as the machine hit the carpet with a thud. "Go and make us breakfast," she demanded, as if she had every right. Without a word, I stood up, walked over to her, and firmly guided her out of the office, closing the door behind her. My heart was racing, a mixture of anger and shock numbing my senses. I picked up my broken laptop, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer frustration. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and dialed my boss, explaining what had just happened. To my relief, he was more understanding than I expected. "I get it, Anna. Family situations can be tough. Just see if you can sort it out, okay? We need you focused." After hanging up, I could hear Susan in the living room, loudly proclaiming to her audience, "You have to teach these young ones how to behave. If you let them, they'll walk all over you. It's our duty to put them in their place." The audacity of her words made my blood boil, but I knew I had to hold it together. Later that evening, when John came home, I told him everything. His face darkened with each word I spoke. "He did what? That's it. She's paying for a new laptop," he said, his jaw set in anger. "This has gone far enough, Anna. I'm sorry. I'll handle it." He confronted his mother about the incident. Susan, perhaps realizing she had crossed a line, suddenly clutched at her chest, her face contorted in pain. "I'm not feeling well," she gasped, her voice shaky. "Mom, are you okay?" John's tone shifted from anger to concern in a heartbeat. "I need to lie down. This is too much for me," Susan said dramatically, before retreating to her room and locking herself in. The next morning, Susan declared she'd be retreating to a boarding house to restore her health, and I watched her pack with a practiced calm, masking the storm of thoughts whirling in my head. Her sudden declaration of illness, miraculously timed to avoid the fallout from breaking my laptop, seemed too convenient. John, equally skeptical, tried once more to broach the topic of the broken laptop, but she dodged his concerns with an airy wave, promising to discuss it later. As her taxi disappeared down the driveway, John turned to me, a mixture of relief and resolve on his face. "Okay, what's the plan?" he asked, as we stood in the quiet aftermath of her departure. "You know how your mom freaked out over Lucas's Spider-Man comics because she hates spiders?" I began, watching his reaction closely. John's eyebrows rose, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, she can't stand them. Why?" "Let's just say, what if we took that fear and decorated the house with it? Not just any decorations, but make it look like a spider den," I suggested, the words out before I could reconsider. John chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief, before giving a firm nod. "Let's do it. It might just be crazy enough to work. And hey, Lucas will get a kick out of it." Feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt, I called a local artist known for their theatrical set designs. I explained our needs: realistic, lifelike spiders painted on the walls, cobwebs that looked like they were spun by giant arachnids, and an overall ambience that screamed spider den. The artist was intrigued and slightly amused by the project, promising to start the next day. John and I stood back, watching the children and the changing decor. "You think she'll ever want to come back after this?" he asked, a twinge of uncertainty in his voice. I shrugged, watching a painter add the finishing touches to a particularly grotesque arachnid above the fireplace. "I don't know. But I hope it makes her think twice about how she treats this place, our home." As the day of Susan's return neared, the house looked less like the family home it had been and more like a set from a horror movie. I had mixed feelings as I surveyed the work. It was beautifully horrifying and served a purpose, but part of me felt guilty about using Susan's phobia against her. The morning Susan was due back, tension buzzed through the house like electricity. John and I exchanged nervous glances as we heard her taxi pull up outside. Susan breezed into the house, her usual air of entitlement surrounding her like a cloak. She didn't even glance around at the transformed decor, fixated only on retreating to her room for some rest after her exhausting retreat. As soon as she opened the door to her room, though, her composure shattered. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house as she stumbled back, her hands clutching at her chest. "What is this? What have you done?" The walls, covered in the eeriest, most lifelike spiders and webs, seemed to close in on her. She bolted from the room, her eyes wide with terror, only to find that the rest of the house matched her room. Spiders in every corner, on every wall, our home had become a den of fear for her. Susan ran down the hallway, screaming, "Remove this! Remove this at once!" Calmly, I stepped into her path, my voice steady. "Susan, this is our house, and we decide how to decorate it. We like it this way." John joined me, adding, "We can't afford any changes right now, not after what happened because of you." Her face went pale, her eyes darting around as if the spiders might jump off the walls. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Your little stunt with Anna's laptop got her fired. We're tight on money now. If you're going to stay, you'll need to contribute $2,800 a month for the mortgage," John lied smoothly, "the fabrication necessary to press our advantage." Susan gasped, clutching her heart again. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to me. I'm leaving. No one appreciates anything I do. I'm not staying in this horror house." As she scrambled to pack her things, I blocked her way at the door. "Before you leave, you owe us $2,000 for the laptop you broke." The color drained from her face, replaced by a flush of anger. She yanked her checkbook from her purse and scribbled furiously. Slamming the check into my hand, she lifted her chin proudly. "There. Now, I'm leaving for good." John and I watched as she hauled her suitcase out the door, her head high, but her shoulders tense. As the door closed behind her, the tension in the air dissolved, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. We turned to each other, John wrapping his arms around me, both of us laughing, a bit from relief, more from disbelief at how things had turned out. "We did it, Anna. It's over." Lucas and Lily came bounding over, their faces bright with smiles. "Is Grandma really gone?" Lucas asked, his voice a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "She's gone, buddy," John confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. "The house is ours again. We can keep the spiders, right?" Lily asked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "We'll see, honey," I laughed, kissing her forehead. "We'll see." That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, their rooms finally free of Susan's overbearing presence, I felt a peace settle over me. We had our home back, our lives back, and while the method was unconventional, the result was all that mattered. I continued working from home as an accountant, still seated at my trusty desk by the window, overlooking the garden where the kids played. Of course, I hadn't really lost my job, that had been a fib to push Susan to take some responsibility, and thankfully, it worked. Life without Susan was less dramatic. Lucas dove deeper into his comic books, often sprawled across his spider-webbed floor, sketching his own superheroes. Lily had taken to gardening, her little patch outside blooming under her careful attention, a stark contrast to the faux arachnid menace indoors. As for Susan, last we heard, she'd moved into a nursing home. Not surprisingly, rumors filtered back to us through the grapevine, she was up to her old tricks, bickering with the administration and quarreling with other residents. Some people never change, I mused aloud after a call from a relative who had visited her. John shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Let's just be glad she's spinning her web somewhere else." And true enough, life had become simpler without her daily dramas. We repaired relationships with friends and neighbors, some of whom Susan had alienated with her nosiness and complaints. Invitations started coming back in for backyard barbecues and birthday parties, social gatherings we had avoided during Susan's tenure in our home. One day, as I was setting up for a video conference call with a client, I caught sight of Lucas and Lily outside, laughing as they chased each other around the garden, ducking under sheets hung out to dry. The normalcy of it filled me with a profound sense of contentment. "I never realized how much tension there was until it was gone," I told John later that evening. He nodded, wrapping an arm around me. "We did what we had to do, Anna. For our family. Our home was our sanctuary once more, the kids were happier, and John and I had found our way back to each other after all the strain. The spiders on the walls served as a reminder of what we had overcome, a quirky symbol of our family's resilience.